Hey everyone, Adam here. Welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving into 5 absolutely wild marriage Reddit stories, and just reading these titles already feels like stepping into emotional chaos. First up, we've got a man working 2 jobs while his wife cheats, and honestly, that already feels like the start of a brutal but satisfying revenge arc. Then, there's the dude who finds his wife's secret second phone and nothing good ever comes from that, so you know his whole world is about to collapse. Third story, the classic my ex is just a friend plot. Except she keeps disappearing every weekend, which is basically a giant neon red flag waving in 4K. Then we've got the wife who lies about going to therapy, and if someone uses mental health as a cover up, you just know the truth is going to be heartbreakingly ugly but with a strong comeback. And finally, the wife who wants an open marriage but only for herself, which already sounds like an entitlement disaster waiting to explode. Buckle up because these stories are about to get intense. My wife cheated while I was working 2 jobs, so I made her watch me build a better life without her. I never thought I'd become the kind of man who worked himself invisible, but looking back now, I guess that's exactly what happened. And it's strange how easy it is to disappear when you're doing it for someone you love so much you don't even realize you're fading. Because for the longest time, I thought exhaustion was just part of being a good husband, part of building a future with Madison, part of being the man who carried dreams on his back without ever asking who carried mine. And maybe that's why I ignored the signs for so long, because I was too tired, too hopeful, too stupidly loyal to imagine that the woman I adored, the woman I married, the woman I worshipped in every quiet moment, could look at me and still choose someone else while I was out killing myself working 2 jobs so she could have the life she said she always wanted. My day usually started at 5 a.m., sharp, before the sun even bothered lifting itself over Austin, when the air was still cold enough that the first breath stung a little, and I'd drag myself out of bed while Madison slept like a spoiled cat under a mountain of blankets, her hair spread across the pillow like she'd posed for some magazine, while I brushed my teeth, put on my HVAC uniform, and made sure I didn't wake her because she needed sleep to function, even though I was the one pulling 80, 90-hour weeks. I'd head out while the world was still quiet, the roads half empty, the sky that weird blue-purple color that always felt like a sigh. And by the time most people were clocking into their one job, I was already knee-deep in someone's attic fixing a busted AC unit while inhaling fiberglass. I didn't complain, not once, because Madison always said she wanted a certain lifestyle, something better than the way she grew up, and I wanted to give it to her. I wanted to be the man who gave her brunches, spa days, a nice apartment, cute outfits she wanted just to feel confident, and all those silly little comforts she loved so much, convincing myself that every hour I spent busting my ass was an hour invested in us, in our future house, in the kids we said we'd have when things settled down. At least that's what I told myself every morning when I drove from job 1 to job 2, chugging cheap gas station coffee just to stay awake long enough to make it through another shift at the warehouse, where the air smelled like cardboard and sweat and fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying mosquitoes. I'd park my truck outside the warehouse around 6 p.m., lean back in the seat, and sometimes just knock out for 20 minutes about before my shift, head tilted back, mouth open, drool threatening to escape. The kind of sleep that isn't really sleep but desperation. And I remember one night, I woke up to my phone buzzing with a text from Madison, "Going out with the girls tonight. Don't wait up." I stared at it through bleary eyes, thumb hovering over the keyboard, and all I wrote back was, "Okay, have fun." Because even though I was bone tired, I wanted her to feel loved, supported, free to have fun while I worked. Funny thing is, she didn't even text me when she got home that night. I didn't think much of it at the time. I blamed it on me being overworked, not her being out with someone else, because when you love someone deeply, your brain bends backwards to make excuses for their behavior while holding you responsible for every little insecurity you have. And really, the first red flag should have been the perfume. Madison never used to wear anything strong, usually fruity, light scents, but around late October, she started coming home smelling like something richer, muskier, something that lingered even after she walked past. And when I commented on it, she laughed it off and said, "Oh, Emily recommended a new brand to me, the one all the girls are wearing." Back then, I smiled, kissed her forehead, told her it smelled good on her, and never questioned why she'd need to smell that good for a casual Thursday night girls' dinner. But the universe likes to whisper before it screams, and I guess the next whisper was when her coworker Derek started appearing in her Instagram stories. I didn't even know the guy before then, just heard his name a few times, usually followed by something like, "He's funny," or "He's so motivated," or "He's always helping me with stuff at work." Little throwaway comments that meant nothing in the moment but now feel like landmines I stepped over without noticing. The story started simple: a group photo at a team lunch, a boomerang at happy hour, Madison tagging her coworkers after a successful project. But then Derek started appearing more frequently, closer to her in photos, always smiling that gym bro grin, his arm casually draped on the back of her chair, their faces a little too close for comfort. One night, when I got home from the warehouse around 2 a.m., I crawled into bed next to her and noticed her phone screen, glowing faintly on the nightstand with a new notification. Normally, Madison slept with her phone face down, always saying it helped her avoid light, but that night it was face up, unlocked, with a message preview that said something like, "Last night was crazy." My heart dropped straight into my stomach for a second, but before I could read more, the screen timed out. I froze, staring at the darkened glass, wrestling with myself, wondering if I should check, if I should confront her, if I should do anything other than lie there pretending everything was fine. In the end, I convinced myself I misread it or was too tired to interpret it correctly, and I rolled over, telling myself she loved me, telling myself she wouldn't do anything like that, telling myself I was just exhausted and paranoid. But the uneasy feeling stuck with me like a splinter under the skin, showing up again when Madison started dressing up more than usual for work. Full makeup, curled hair, new outfits she insisted were on sale, spritzing that damn perfume she swore her friend recommended. And when I get home after 12-hour shifts with sore muscles and dirt on my face, she'd barely look up from her phone to say hi. Like I was an inconvenience instead of the man funding her entire life. Still, I kept loving her, kept trying, kept believing her half-hearted "love you" text, because the alternative, that she was capable of betraying me, was too painful to accept. The real shift happened on a Saturday morning when I didn't have to work my second job, which was rare, like a tiny miracle. I came home early from the HVAC job, excited to surprise Madison, thinking maybe we could spend a day together like we used to. Go for breakfast at our favorite spot, walk around the lake, maybe even talk about our plans again. But when I walked into the apartment, the smell hit me before anything else. Strong cologne, not mine, not anyone I knew, a masculine scent hanging in the air like it refused to leave. I stood there, keys still in my hand, staring into the living room like I'd walked into the wrong apartment. Madison came out of the bedroom a moment later, hair messy, cheeks flushed, wearing one of her tight workout tops even though she hated working out in the morning. She looked startled, only for a second, then plastered on a smile that didn't reach her eyes and said, "Babe, you're home early? I just finished some morning yoga." I didn't ask why the apartment smelled like a men's cologne ad. I didn't ask why she looked like she'd just been caught doing something she shouldn't. I didn't ask anything because I felt that same splinter of doubt stabbing a little deeper, and instead of confronting her, I swallowed it all down with a weak smile and told her I'd shower before we went out. That whole day, she acted jittery, checking her phone constantly, stepping away to answer work messages. Even though it was Saturday, she laughed too loudly, complimented me too much, tried too hard to be affectionate, and I kept pretending I didn't notice anything wrong because I needed her to still be the woman I believed she was. The final whisper before the scream happened about a week later on a night when the warehouse ordered overtime. And I took the shift because we needed the money. Around midnight, I sat in the break room eating cold pasta from home, scrolling through Netflix previews on the shared tablet we kept synced between our devices. I was half asleep, half hungry, and fully drained when a photo folder popped up under the Recent tab, something labeled Work Event 2. I clicked it absentmindedly, expecting boring team building photos or office selfies. Instead, I froze. The first photo was of Madison in a dimly lit hotel room, wearing the red dress she swore she bought for a girl's night, but she wasn't alone. Derek's arm was wrapped around her waist, his hand too low to be friendly, both of them smiling like they were trying to record a moment they knew they'd want to revisit. My thumb trembled as I scrolled, each picture worse than the last. Selfies in bed, shots of champagne glasses on a nightstand, a mirror picture of them kissing, messages between them syncing through the tablet because of some cloud backup I'd forgotten existed. I felt like the world tilted sideways, like the floor dropped out beneath me, and suddenly the exhaustion, the confusion, the red flags I shoved aside all slammed into me at once. I sat there in that ugly warehouse break room with buzzing lights and a vending machine humming beside me, staring at proof that my wife, my Madison, had been cheating on me while I was sweating through long shifts to pay for the life she enjoyed. And the worst part, I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't throw the tablet. I just went completely, terrifyingly quiet because in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It woke up. When I found those photos on the tablet, something inside me didn't erupt. It crystallized, hardened, sharpened into a quiet storm that didn't roar or rage, but instead hummed under my skin like electrical current. And in that moment, I realized that the version of me who begged for scraps of affection, who overworked himself for a woman who didn't even respect him, who convinced himself he wasn't enough, that man was already dead, replaced by someone colder, clearer, and far more dangerous in silence than he ever would have been in anger. I finished my warehouse shift like a ghost, clocked out, drove home at 3 a.m., and slid into bed next to Madison without touching her, my mind running through scenarios, timelines, possibilities, not with panic but with precision, and as she murmured something half asleep and rolled toward me, smelling faintly of someone else's cologne, I stared at the ceiling and vowed I would not confront her, not scream, not ask why, because she didn't deserve the privilege of seeing me break. She would only see what I allowed her to see. The next morning, I woke before her, brewed coffee like I always did, packed up for work like I always did, kissed her forehead like I always did. But inside, I was already gone. That Monday, I took my first real lunch break in years and met with a divorce lawyer named Anderson, a middle-aged woman with calm eyes and a voice like sandpaper dipped in wisdom, who listened without interrupting as I told her everything, from my 2 jobs to Madison's late nights to the photos on the tablet. And when I finished, she leaned back, steepled her fingers, and said, "You're not angry right now, which means you're very, very serious. That's good. Angry men make mistakes. Quiet men and marriage is clean." She walked me through everything, what documentation I needed, what accounts to separate, what to stop paying immediately, how to secure my financial safety, how to leave no openings for manipulation. I walked out of her office feeling lighter, not because anything was fixed yet, but because for the first time, I had direction, purpose, clarity, and a plan. The next few days became an exercise in acting, something I didn't know I was capable of. At home, I spoke softly, kindly even, like a man who was simply tired from work, not one secretly unraveling every thread of his marriage from the inside out. She didn't suspect a thing. While she showered, I quietly unlinked my paycheck from our joint account and redirected my deposits to a new personal checking account she didn't know existed. When she went for her evening workouts, I took photos of every suspicious charge on her credit card, the fancy restaurants, the Uber rides to hotels, the lingerie she never wore for me. I screenshot messages she forgot were synced to the tablet. I backed up everything in a hidden cloud folder my lawyer had access to. And slowly, quietly, I cut the financial strings she used to puppet her lifestyle. The first shock hit her about a week later when she came storming into the living room, holding her credit card, saying, "Babe, my payment bounced. Did something happen with the bank?" I didn't even look up from the work schedule I was reviewing. I just said, "Yeah, I tightened some things. We've been overspending, so I stopped paying that card. It's under your name anyway." The look on her face, confusion mixed with irritation, was delicious in a way I didn't expect. "Why didn't you tell me?" she demanded, her voice a little too high, a little too nervous. I shrugged. "Didn't think I needed to. You said you're independent, right? Figured you'd appreciate handling your own card." She blinked fast, like someone had thrown sand in her eyes, and muttered something about needing to make a call before walking away. And for the first time, I saw it. The slight crack in her confidence. The more distant I became, the more agitated she got. I stopped asking where she was going, stopped texting her on break, stopped complimenting her outfits, stopped being the dependable, predictable husband she took for granted, and the shift unsettled her in a way she couldn't hide. She started hovering around me more, asking if I was okay, tilting her head with fake concern as she said, "You've been acting weird lately, Ethan. Did something happen at work?" I'd smile back with the emptiest expression I could manage and say, "Just tired." She didn't like that answer. Not one bit. Around this time, her affair started to fall apart. Not because of anything I said or did, but because affairs thrive in fantasy and collapse in reality. Derek, her coworker hero, her Instagram story buddy, her hotel room partner in crime, suddenly became busy. He stopped liking her posts, he stopped replying as fast, he stopped offering to drive her home. And once, when I pretended to be asleep on the couch while she whispered angrily into her phone, I heard her hiss, "Are you serious? You said things would be easier once he stopped being around so much." That one sentence could have set me on fire if I were still the man I used to be, but the new me simply cataloged it like evidence in a file and let it harden me further. The cracks spread faster. Her mood swings, her fake smiles, her sudden attempts at affection, the forced kisses on my cheek, the late night crawling into my lap as if physical closeness could mask emotional rot. She'd ask questions with a little tremble in her voice, like, "Do you still love me?" And I'd say, "Of course," with a tone so neutral it bordered on dead. And every time I watched her swallow hard, I felt another piece of my old self fall away. She couldn't figure out what was happening, and she hated not being in control. Meanwhile, I was making quiet moves. I stopped paying her phone bill. I removed myself as a co-signer on her car loan. I froze the joint credit line so she couldn't drag me into debt. I met with the lawyer again and finalized the paperwork. The strangest thing was how easy it became to pretend. I'd come home from a shift, drop my keys in the bowl, listen to her ramble about her dramatic day at work, nod at the right places, laugh when she tried to be funny, all while planning the moment she would be served. It was like living in a movie where I knew the ending but she didn't, and every scene was another step toward the finale. She grew more careless as Derek pulled away. Her lies got sloppier. She'd say she was at the office late when her makeup was smudged. She'd claim she was at dinner with the girls, but post a story with only one wine glass on the table. She'd talk about Derek as a friend, but flinch whenever his name popped up in conversation. And I just let her talk. Let her lie. Let her unravel. The silence worked like acid on her conscience. Slow, but lethal. The tension built so thick in the house that even the air felt heavy. At night, she'd inch closer to me in bed, slide her hand against my chest like she used to when we were still us. But this time, I'd remain still, breathing slow, pretending I was asleep, and I could feel her heart beating too fast against my arm. She knew something was coming. She just didn't know what. The day everything snapped into place was a Wednesday. One of those deceptively sunny Texas afternoons where the sky looks too calm for anything bad to happen. I came home early, a planned early, not a coincidence, and Madison was on the couch, scrolling her phone with that dazed, anxious look she'd been wearing more often. She glanced up and forced a smile. "You're home early? Want me to make dinner?" I told her no. I wasn't hungry, and just a tiny harmless answer made her shoulders stiffen like I'd slapped her. Minutes later, a knock came at the door. A firm, professional knock. Madison looked confused, stood up, walked over, and opened it. A man in a neutral suit held out an envelope. "Are you Madison Carter?" he asked. She nodded slowly. "These are for you." She took them, brows furrowed, and closed the door as the server walked away. She turned, opened the envelope, skimmed the first page, and her face drained of every trace of color. "Ethan, what is this?" she whispered, her voice cracking like thin ice. I looked at her, calm, steady, unblinking, and said the first truly honest words I'd spoken to her in months. "It's the beginning of my life without you. I swear, if someone had told me a year ago that the same guy who used to sit in the parking lot after arguments with his wife, staring at the steering wheel like it held the answers to the universe, would someday wake up in a sunlight-filled apartment that smelled like fresh linen and coffee instead of long-dried tears, I probably would have laughed in their face. But that's exactly where life had taken me after everything with Madison blew up. And chapter 3 of my life felt like the part where the main character finally stops crawling and starts standing up straight again. The first morning in my new apartment didn't feel triumphant. It felt painfully quiet. No Madison slamming drawers because she couldn't find anything in this mess, even though I was the one who put everything away. No Derek's voice echoing in my head. No leftover tension from the night before. Just me, a mattress, a lamp, and the realization that I didn't know who I was without the constant background noise of a failing marriage. But something about that emptiness felt clean, like someone handed me a blank page and dared me to write something better this time. So I did. Every morning, before my brain had a chance to spiral, I dragged myself to the gym. I started with 20 minutes on the treadmill because 20 minutes was all I could do without feeling like my lungs were filing for divorce too. But slowly, day by day, the treadmill became the bench became the cables, and the cables became this weird sense of pride I hadn't felt since college. I watched my reflection change. Not drastically, not dramatically, just enough. Enough for me to see that I wasn't the beaten down guy who begged his wife to talk to him anymore. And while my muscles grew, so did this strange thing called self-respect. It surprised me. Therapy helped too, even though I told myself 100 times I didn't need it. The first session was just me sitting there, arms crossed, pretending I wasn't falling apart. The second was me actually speaking. The third was me breaking down because apparently years of swallowing my emotions wasn't healthy. Shocking, right? But the best part wasn't the crying, it was the clarity that came after. I wasn't crazy, I wasn't overreacting, I wasn't the villain Madison painted me as whenever she needed to justify something shitty. I was just a guy who tried too hard for someone who didn't try at all. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for wanting better. That small shift made everything else start moving. I bought new clothes, not because I wanted to look better for someone, like Madison used to accuse me of whenever I ironed a shirt, but because it felt good to put on something that fit the version of me I was trying to become. At work, something wild happened. I stopped walking on eggshells. I wasn't checking my phone to see if Madison was mad or complaining about something or asking why I hadn't responded in the last 6 minutes. I wasn't mentally rehearsing apologies for things I didn't do. Suddenly, I had energy for my actual job, and apparently my boss noticed because one afternoon she called me into her office, and for the first time ever, instead of bracing for criticism, I heard the words, "We're promoting you." She said I had become a more confident leader, more focused, more present. Funny what happens when your life isn't a slow-motion emotional car crash. With the extra income, I filled my apartment with furniture I actually liked. Clean lines, warm lights, a couch that didn't sink in the middle like the one Madison insisted we keep because it's good enough. I bought plants even though I fully expected to murder them unintentionally. I picked up cooking, mostly because my therapist said learning a new skill helps rebuild identity. The first week I burned rice. Not burned as in crispy, burned as in the smoke alarm screamed at me like Madison used to. But after a month, I could make chicken, vegetables, pasta, and eventually meals that actually tasted like someone who cared about himself had made them. On the weekends, I went outdoors. Not because anyone dragged me along, but because I wanted to see what peace felt like under an open sky. I made new friends at the gym, at work, even at the random coffee shop near my place where the barista kept trying to guess my vibe based on the drink I ordered. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, life didn't feel like survival anymore. It felt like a beginning. Meanwhile, and I swear I'm not saying this with glee, just brutal honesty, Madison's picture-perfect life started to crumble piece by piece, like the universe had finally stopped holding the safety net beneath her. Derek dumped her, not quietly, not kindly. He left her with the same cold, dismissive tone she once used on me. Apparently, cheating with a married woman didn't come with long-term stability. Who knew? Her friends, the ones who acted like I was the boring husband holding her back, took Derek's side because according to them, he was the one who got hurt. I didn't even have the energy to analyze that deeply, but karma was clearly spelling out her name in bold letters at that point. She couldn't pay her rent without Derek's help, and once her friends distanced themselves, she suddenly found herself living a life where people didn't enable her worst habits. She had to actually face herself, and for someone used to being the center of everyone's emotional labor, that must have felt like freefall. I didn't know all of this at once. It trickled in through texts, through mutual acquaintances, through the weird, dramatic world Madison created for herself. What I did notice immediately was her reaching out. At first, it was once a week, then every couple of days, then way too often for someone who didn't need me when she left. The messages weren't angry or manipulative this time. They were sad, confused, desperate in a way I had never seen from her. She said she missed me. She said she made a mistake. She said she didn't expect Derek to leave. She said she didn't expect me to move on so fast, which was hilarious because she moved on before she even packed her bags. The wildest part, I didn't block her. Not because I wanted her back, not because I cared, but because I was genuinely indifferent, something I never imagined being. Her text didn't control my mood anymore. Her crying didn't feel like my responsibility. Her loneliness didn't feel like my burden. I had worried that I would feel powerful ignoring her, like some triumphant revenge fantasy. But honestly, there was no triumph, just neutrality, peace. The kind where someone who once shattered you becomes just another notification you swipe away without reading fully. I realized that the version of me she expected to come crawling back no longer existed. I wasn't angry, I wasn't vengeful, I wasn't broken, I was just done. Completely, irreversibly done. And the best part, she could feel it. The more I grew, the more she crumbled. And not because I wished it on her, but because she was finally living in a world where her choices had consequences. She didn't recognize me anymore. Not because I became someone new overnight, but because she had never bothered to see me clearly in the first place. For years, she looked at me and saw someone safe, someone soft, someone who would stay no matter how deeply she cut. But when I stopped bleeding for her, when I started healing instead, she didn't know what to do with the version of me that chose himself. That's the thing about rising from something that tried to destroy you. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it doesn't require an audience or applause. It's just a steady climb until one day you look down and realize the person who once held power over you is so far below that their voice can't reach you anymore. And that's where I was. Standing in a life I built with my own hands, breathing air that finally felt clean, looking at the wreckage Madison stood in, knowing deep in my bones that I didn't have to save her. I didn't even want to. Because for the first time in forever, I had finally saved myself. I'll never forget the afternoon Madison showed up at my place because it felt like the universe had been quietly preparing me for that moment from the second I walked out of our old apartment, carrying the last of my things, and everything leading up to it. The gym mornings, the therapy breakthroughs, the quiet dinners I cooked for myself while soft music played in the background, somehow suddenly made sense when I heard that knock. It wasn't loud or frantic, it was this soft, unsure tapping, like she wasn't even convinced she deserved to be standing at my door. And when I opened it, the first thing I noticed wasn't her face, but the fact that I didn't feel anything. No old ache twisting in my chest, no panic, no anger, just this neutral curiosity, like seeing a distant memory show up in physical form. Madison looked smaller somehow, not physically, but like life had pressed down on her in ways she wasn't used to. Her hair wasn't done, her eyes were tired, and she kept wringing her hands like she was trying to squeeze words out of her palms. She asked if we could talk. No theatrics, no accusations, none of the venom she used to carry like perfume. Just a quiet, defeated request. And because I didn't fear her anymore, I stepped aside and let her in. I watched her eyes scan my apartment. The soft lighting, the neatly arranged shelves, the clean kitchen, the plants I somehow hadn't killed yet, the subtle smell of coffee and cedar wood. And I could see something crack inside her. She had expected chaos or loneliness or bitterness plastered across the walls. She expected a version of me who was still wounded, still waiting, still orbiting her gravitational pull. Instead, she found someone she didn't recognize. She walked slowly, touching the back of the couch, the edge of the counter, the little framed photo of a hiking trail I took on my solo trip last month. "It's different," she whispered. But what she really meant was, "You're different," and the shock on her face told me she had no idea how deeply that difference ran. She sat down on the couch, pulling her legs close like she was bracing for impact, and for a moment we just existed in silence. Not the tense, suffocating silence we used to share at the end of arguments, but something heavier, more real. Then she started talking, not carefully, not strategically, just spilling everything like she'd been holding it in for months. She told me Derek left her and did it in the coldest way possible. She said her friends took his side because apparently they all knew things she didn't tell me. She admitted she couldn't afford her apartment, that work felt unbearable, that she didn't feel like herself anymore. She said she missed me, not in the casual, "I miss the idea of you" way, but in this raw, painful way that sounded like regret had finally clawed its way into her chest. She talked about how she thought I would fall apart after she left, how she expected me to keep reaching out, how she assumed I'd stay stuck in the same place emotionally while she explored her new life. But instead, she watched from a distance as I started showing up at the gym, posting pictures from hikes, getting promoted, making new friends, building a life that didn't have any room for her. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't flinch. I didn't remind her of the nights she made me feel like a burden, or the months she grew distant while swearing nothing was wrong, or how she looked me in the eyes and said she needed space when what she really needed was someone else's bed. I didn't bring up the way I used to sit awake wondering why the woman I married felt like a stranger. I just listened, calm, steady, grounded in a way the old me never could have been. When she finally stopped, her voice breaking around the edges, she looked at me with this trembling hope. Like she believed that if she just said enough, cried enough, apologized enough, I would fold the way I always used to. She reached for my hand and I gently moved it away. Not harshly, not dramatically, just truthfully. That was when she broke. Her face crumpled like she was witnessing something she never expected, the moment where I wasn't hers anymore. She whispered, "Ethan, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. I know I made the worst mistake of my life, but I want to fix things. I want us. I need you." And that's when something inside me settled. This warm, steady certainty that closure wasn't always explosive or vengeful. Sometimes it was quiet, like a soft breath before a final line. I looked at her with compassion, not love, and said the words that had been forming inside me for months without me even realizing. "I'm not angry anymore. I just don't want a life with someone who couldn't wait for me." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't say it to hurt her. I said it because it was real, because somewhere between rebuilding myself and rediscovering my worth, I had outgrown the version of me who begged for her affection. And when those words landed, I watched her expression shift into something I had never seen from her before. This hollow, shattering grief that wasn't about guilt or embarrassment, but true recognition. Recognition that she didn't just lose the man she took for granted, she lost the man I became afterward. The man who rose from the rubble she created. The man who finally learned how to choose himself. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Her eyes filled, then overflowed, and she covered her mouth like she was trying to hold in the sound of her world collapsing. And the strangest part? I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel pity. I didn't feel superiority. I just felt done, calmly, peacefully done. She apologized through tears. Real ones, not the manipulative kind she used back when she wanted the last word. She kept saying she wished she could go back, that she didn't realize what she had until it was gone, that she didn't expect to see a version of me who looked so alive without her. But closure isn't about rewinding the past, it's about accepting the present. When she finally stood up to leave, her legs trembling like the ground beneath her wasn't stable anymore, she looked around my apartment one last time, not to find flaws or criticize anything, but because she knew this would be the last room she ever saw me in, the last moment where she still had even a fragment of hope left. She whispered, "You look happy." And for the first time in years, I didn't have to fake the answer. "I am." She nodded, small, defeated, understanding more in that 1 second than she had in the last 5 years, and walked toward the door with a slowness that felt like grief itself was dragging at her feet. I followed, not out of obligation, but because it felt right to escort someone out when you know they're leaving for good. At the door, she hesitated, looking up at me with a final plea she didn't dare say out loud, hoping maybe I would stop her. Maybe I would give her one more chance. But I didn't. I simply gave her the gentlest, kindest goodbye I had left, a soft nod. She stepped into the hallway, blinking back tears that weren't mine to wipe anymore, and I closed the door, not slamming it, not locking it with dramatic flair, just easing it shut with the calmness of someone who had finally made peace with the past. The click of that door wasn't an ending for her. It was an ending for me, a quiet, steady victory, a moment of real closure. And the beautiful truth, it didn't feel like I was closing the door on her. It felt like I was finally opening the door to myself. The end. I discovered my wife's secret, second phone, and the truth behind it, destroyed everything I thought was real. I was 32 years old, a software engineer living in the quiet suburbs outside Chicago, and if anyone had asked me back then how my marriage was going, I would have probably smiled like an idiot and said something like, "Yeah man, Emily and I are solid." It wasn't just a line. I genuinely believed it. I thought I had done everything right. Married the girl I met in college, bought a 3-bedroom house with a backyard big enough for summer BBQs, worked my ass off to build a stable income, and supported her through nursing school and later into her career at a downtown hospital. To everyone we knew, we were the couple that looked like they'd figured life out. And I believed it too, because nothing in my day-to-day life suggested otherwise, until the day everything flipped upside down in a way I never expected, not even in my worst paranoias. I still remember that Saturday morning with stupid clarity, like my brain stamped it into my memory permanently. Emily had taken her mom to a spa appointment, and before leaving she asked me, "Hey babe, can you take my car for servicing today?" The engine light came on again. I told her sure, kissed her goodbye, and watched her drive away like it was any other normal morning. The irony burns now. That casual sure is exactly what cracked open the life I thought I understood. I took her SUV to the driveway, started cleaning out the back seat, and that's when I saw it. Wedged deep under the passenger seat, just barely visible if the sun hit right. A phone. A second phone. Not her iPhone, the one she always had glued to her hand. This one was older, cracked on the corner, dusty but clearly still functioning. For a moment I just stared at it, confused as hell. My first thought was that it must have been her old phone she forgot to get rid of, but something about it felt wrong. Emily wasn't the type to keep junk lying around, especially not old electronics. I picked it up, brushed dust off the screen, and before I even had a chance to think further, the screen lit up and vibrated in my hand. A notification. A message. I felt this weird chill crawl up my spine as I read it. Room 314 tonight? I miss you already. Jay. My heart dropped straight into my stomach. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at those words, waiting for them to make sense, waiting for some explanation to magically appear, but nothing came. It was like reading a message meant for a stranger. Not my wife. The woman who fell asleep next to me every night, who kissed me goodbye every morning, who told me last week she wished we had more date nights. My hands were shaking as I unlocked the phone, using the same pin she used for everything. I don't even know why I tried it. Instinct? Maybe. Or maybe some part of me already knew. But when the screen opened instantly, my stomach twisted. And then the real nightmare started. The phone wasn't empty, not even close. It was a fully functioning device, her second life neatly packed inside it. The first thing I saw was the messages. Thousands of them. Not a few, not a handful, not some dumb flirty conversation she could brush off as a mistake. Thousands, years worth. I started scrolling, numb, my breath shallow, and with every swipe my world got darker. Photos of her in hotel rooms, some in pajamas, some in dresses I'd never seen her wear, some I still can't get out of my head. Videos of her laughing in ways she rarely did with me anymore. The guy, tall, bald, maybe late 30s, had his arm around her in almost every picture. Hotel bookings, Uber receipts, secret dates. Conversations filled with, I miss you, I can't wait to see you. And the one that gutted me, I'm waiting for the day I can finally leave him and be with you completely. She called him her soulmate. Soulmate. I didn't even realize I dropped down onto the driveway until my knees scraped the concrete. I don't cry easily. Not because I'm tough, just because emotions don't hit me that fast. But that moment, I wasn't just heartbroken. I was humiliated, blindsided, like the foundation of my entire life had just turned to dust under me. I kept scrolling, desperate to find something, anything, that explained this as a phase or a mistake or some insane misunderstanding. But everything pointed to one truth. This wasn't new. This wasn't small. This wasn't a fling. This was a relationship, a long, planned, intentional relationship. She wasn't cheating impulsively. She was building a second life. My hands felt cold as I kept reading. There were messages from nights she told me she was working late. Messages from weekends she said she was going to her sister's place in Wisconsin. Messages from evenings she claimed she was grabbing wine with a friend. Hell, there were even messages from the same night she came home crying, telling me she and her mom had a fight. Turns out, she was in a hotel with him the whole time. And what really hit me hardest wasn't the sex. It was the familiarity, the comfort, the depth. They had inside jokes. They had anniversary dates. They had plans, playlists, shared notes. She told him about her day in ways she stopped telling me months ago. She told him her fears, her dreams, the names she wanted to give our future kids. That one nearly made me throw up. They had talked about moving in together, about what city they choose, what kind of apartment, how they decorate the bedroom, and the part that killed me beyond anything else. She had written, I don't think he suspects anything. He trusts me too much. He trusts me too much. My chest tightened so hard it hurt to breathe. And in that moment, sitting alone in the driveway with a stranger's phone full of my wife's secrets in my hand, I realized something terrifying. I didn't know the woman I married. Or at least I didn't know this version of her. The version who lied effortlessly, who went behind my back for years, who was able to smile at me in the morning and then spend the night in a hotel room with another man. I wanted to march straight into the house, grab her things, and throw them into the street. I wanted to scream, demand answers, force her to confront everything she'd been hiding. But instead, a strange calm washed over me. A clarity. If I confronted her now, she'd deny, manipulate, twist everything, cry, claim she was confused, or spin it into some story that made me feel guilty somehow. Emily was good at controlling conversations, good at shifting focus, good at making herself look like the victim. So instead of reacting, I inhaled deeply, stood up slowly, and made a decision. I needed to understand the full pattern, the full extent of this betrayal, not just emotionally, but logically, methodically. If she spent years building a secret world, I would uncover every piece of it before she even realized I knew. So I went back through the messages, this time with purpose. I made mental connections to real dates. The night she said she was stuck with a difficult patient, she was in a Hilton downtown. The weekend she told me she was helping her mom move furniture. She was in a Marriott in Milwaukee. The Tuesday she claimed she had a late certification class, she was in an Uber heading to his apartment. It wasn't random, it was structured, it was planned, and every detail of it matched periods of time where she'd grown distant, where she seemed tired, distracted, emotional. I'd assumed stress, workload, family drama, everything but this. And the more I pieced together, the more a horrifying truth settled into my bones. She wasn't planning on stopping. In fact, her messages showed she was preparing for something bigger. Talking about how she was getting closer to making the move. Saying things like, he won't see it coming, and I just need to feel financially secure before I leave. Financially secure. The word struck me like an ice pick. She wasn't just emotionally cheating, she was preparing to leave me when the moment suited her, but not before she squeezed what she needed out of our life together. I scrolled until my eyes hurt, my thumb numb from flicking through endless messages, my heart pounded with every new discovery. The photos weren't just selfies, they were memories, dates, trips, meals I had never shared with her, outfits she never wore around me. And the man, Jay, looked like he belonged in them. Comfortable, confident, at ease with her in ways she rarely seen with me anymore. When I finally looked up from the screen, I realized the sun had shifted, casting long shadows from the house. I had been sitting there for almost 2 hours. My mind was spinning, but beneath the chaos, a steady, cold resolve began to form. This wasn't a drunken mistake or a temporary lapse. It wasn't boredom. It wasn't loneliness. It wasn't marriage fatigue. Emily had a whole second life she had carefully maintained for years. She lied to me with precision. She managed her schedule around him with ease. She funded hotel visits without me ever suspecting. And the worst part, the part that makes my chest burn even now, is that she planned to leave on her timeline, when she was ready, when she felt safe enough financially, when she felt he was committed enough, when she had gotten everything she wanted out of me first. Knowing that, feeling that truth settle over me, was like standing in an earthquake while everything I built around me cracked apart. And it was in that moment, holding her secret phone in my shaking hands, staring at proof of a betrayal so enormous it barely felt real, that the final realization hit me. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a fling. It wasn't a phase. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. This was intentional. This was calculated. This was a second life she had chosen, and she chose it over me. And I knew, right then, my marriage was already over. I just hadn't been told yet. After that day in the driveway, after the truth sucker punched me so hard that I felt like I was floating outside my own body, I realized the worst mistake I could make would be confronting Emily too soon. Because the second she knew I was onto her, she'd go into performance mode. Crying, lying, denying, spinning stories so fast even my logical brain would start questioning reality. And I wasn't about to give her that opportunity. Not after discovering she'd been building a whole damn relationship behind my back, like she was starring in some secret double life drama. So I did the opposite of what my instincts screamed at me to do. I stayed calm, collected, and I pretended everything was normal. I acted like the same clueless husband she assumed I was, the one she told her soulmate she could manipulate because he trusts me too much. If she believed that, then I needed to weaponize that trust long enough to gather everything I needed. Because the more I thought about the messages, the hotel receipts, the photos, the way she funded everything without me ever noticing, the clearer it became that this wasn't only emotional betrayal, it was logistical, planned, financial. So that evening, after she came home, talking about how tiring her day with her mom had been, I played the part. I kissed her forehead, made dinner, asked about her day, and watched her lie to my face while I stirred pasta. It took everything in me not to grab the secret phone from my pocket and throw it on the counter like a grenade and scream, "Explain this." But instead, I smiled, nodded, and tucked away every detail. The shift in her eyes, the tightness in her voice, the casualness with which she lied. That night, when she fell asleep beside me, breathing softly like she didn't have a second life burning a hole through my soul, I quietly got out of bed, took my laptop to the living room, and opened our joint bank account. I was expecting to see small inconsistencies, maybe a few odd charges, maybe some hotel receipts she paid for herself, maybe some missing cash here or there. What I didn't expect was to feel my chest tighten with the kind of panic you feel when the ground disappears beneath you, because the financial betrayal was so massive, so calculated, that it made the cheating look almost casual. At first, I noticed transfers I didn't recognize. Small ones at the beginning, like $200 here, $350 there, always labeled as personal expense, something she usually did when buying gifts for her family. But then the numbers grew. $1,200, $2,000, $3,600, some almost every month. And worse, these transfers didn't go to any account with her name on it. They went to an account I'd never seen before. Hidden, private, one she never told me existed. And that was just the beginning. As I scrolled, my eyes caught something else. Credit card charges I didn't recognize. Hotel charges, flights, Ubers, expensive restaurant bills, purchases from fancy stores downtown. But when I checked the card number, my stomach dropped. It was my card. At least it looked like mine. Same bank, same format. But when I went through my physical cards, everything was accounted for. It wasn't until I dug deeper, pulling up the list of accounts linked under my SSN, that the real horror revealed itself. She had opened 2 credit cards under my name. 2. Without telling me, without asking me, without me signing anything. She forged my identity and used those cards to fund her entire affair. Hotel rooms, plane tickets, lingerie, electronics, and worst of all, expensive gifts she bought for him. Watches, shoes, a gaming console, a weekend retreat package, all charged under my credit, my identity, my financial future. And when I checked the billing statements, the email tied to those cards wasn't even her main email. She had a separate one, created solely to hide the transactions. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking, feeling this mixture of rage and heartbreak and disbelief that didn't seem humanly possible. She didn't just cheat on me, she used me. She drained me. She built a secret life using the money I worked my ass off for, using my credit, using the trust I handed her without hesitation. She made me financially responsible for the affair she was planning to leave me for. I kept digging, pulling up credit reports, loan histories, everything. That's when I discovered the hotel accounts. Yup, those exist, where the member name booked under wasn't hers. It was mine. My name was attached to rooms she stayed in with him. I had unknowingly paid for at least 9 different stays across Chicago, Milwaukee, and Indianapolis. She even used my travel points, my points, and she had registered her lover under guest. The longer I dug, the deeper the betrayal went. It wasn't emotional cheating, it wasn't physical cheating, it was financial fraud, identity theft, a criminal offense, and she did it while kissing me goodnight. My head was spinning. I sat there on the couch feeling like the air in the room had thinned to nothing. I needed help. Not emotional help, not validation, professional help. Someone who knew exactly what this was legally. So the next morning, before Emily even woke up, I contacted a divorce attorney. I told him every detail I discovered so far, from the phone to the credit cards to the transfers to the hotel bookings. And the first thing he said was so blunt that it froze me. Don't confront her yet. Don't say a word, not even a hint. This is bigger than cheating. This is fraud, felony fraud. The word felony made my stomach twist. I asked him what I should do, and he laid it out. Collect every piece of evidence I could find, document everything, gather a full financial trail, and track her movements to prove the affair, the spending, the intent, and the pattern of deceit. This, he said, is not just infidelity. This is a financial crime committed by someone living in your home. That line hit me like a hammer. Someone living in your home. Not your wife, not your partner, not Emily, someone. Because legally, emotionally, financially, she had crossed a line you don't come back from. So I got to work. I spent every night for the next week gathering evidence like I was building a case file for a high-stakes investigation. I screenshotted everything from her secret phone, messages, photos, videos, call logs. I downloaded every bank statement for the last 4 years. I pulled credit reports for both of us. I printed statements. I collected screenshots of every unexplained charge. I even logged into her laptop using the same PIN, because she used the same one for everything, and found confirmation emails for hotel bookings and Uber rides. And then I took it further. I installed a tracking device under her SUV, the kind meant for fleet vehicles, small, magnetic, hard to detect. And just to be safe, I slipped a spare GPS AirTag into the lining of her trunk. This wasn't paranoia. This was strategy. Because if she wanted to live a second life, I needed to know every stop she made, every detour, every lie disguised as a late shift, every girls' night that was actually a hotel room with him. And the more I tracked her movement over those next days, the more nauseatingly clear it became that her affair wasn't some sporadic fling. It was routine, practiced, scheduled every Tuesday, every Thursday, at least one weekend evening, all matching the messages, all matching the receipts, and I recorded everything. Every trip, every location, every timeline. I even started casually recording conversations with her, using voice memos on my phone during dinner, during car rides, during small talk, because my attorney told me capturing her lies in real time would help prove intent in court. It was chilling how easily she lied. On nights, she said she was stuck charting patient records. The tracker showed her SUV parked neatly in front of a downtown hotel. On nights, she said she was grabbing food with coworkers. She was at his apartment building. On nights, she said she was crashing at her sister's because they were bonding. She was 100 miles away with him. My home became less of a home and more of a surveillance hub. And eventually, I knew I had enough. But then came the night that broke whatever tiny microscopic piece of hope still clung to me. I followed her, not closely enough to get noticed, but enough to confirm everything with my own eyes. I parked across the street from the hotel, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs open. I watched as she pulled into the lot, stepped out in a dress she'd never worn for me. Not once in our entire marriage, and waited near the entrance like she was starring in some romance movie. And then he showed up. Jay, the guy from the pictures, the guy she called her soulmate. But when he stepped out of his car, something inside me snapped into a new kind of rage, because I recognized him, not from the phone, not from the photos, but from my dinner table. He was a coworker from her hospital, one of the nurses in her unit, a guy who had eaten in my home multiple times, a guy I grilled steaks for, a guy who handed me beer and talked about football and acted like he respected our marriage. And now he was hugging my wife. Tight, familiar, practiced, kissing her like she belonged to him while I sat in the shadows watching my life fracture even more. I recorded everything. Their hug, their kiss, their check-in, the way she reached for his hand when they walked inside. And something in me died right there in that parked car. Not the love that had died days earlier. What died was the illusion. The illusion that I had somehow missed a red flag, that I had been careless, that there was something wrong with me. No, she hadn't just cheated. She had played me, lied to me, used me, taken advantage of my trust so completely that she turned me into the financial sponsor of her affair. And watching her with him, their comfort, their ease, their routine, made it painfully clear that this wasn't new. This wasn't recent. This wasn't some sudden connection. I had been played for years, and now I finally knew the full truth. The woman asleep next to me every night was living a second life so developed, so deeply rooted, that I had been nothing more than the financial foundation she stood on while she built a future with another man. And as I sat in that car, recording the night she thought I'd never know about, one truth settled into my bones, so cold it felt permanent. I wasn't fighting for my marriage anymore. I was preparing to destroy the fantasy she built and expose the fraud she never thought I'd uncover. Because now I had everything, and she had no idea her world was one signature away from collapsing. I spent the entire night before setting the trap in complete silence, sitting on the couch with the lights off, staring at the wall while the weight of everything I had uncovered pressed against my ribs like a cinder block. And instead of screaming or crying or shaking like a normal person, I felt this cold, surgical clarity settle into my bones as if my brain had been rewired to do one thing. Enter Second Life without warning, without mercy, without a single crack she could escape through. So the next morning, before she even left for her shift at the hospital, I froze every credit card she opened in my name, shut down the secondary checking account she thought I didn't know about, notified the bank's fraud department, and filed an identity theft alert with every agency I could hit before 9 a.m. And while she smiled and kissed my cheek on her way out the door, telling me she'd be busy with back-to-back admits and might be late, I sat at the kitchen table and watched the system quietly, beautifully choke the oxygen out of her secret lifestyle. By noon, her first purchase attempt failed. By 2 p.m., another fraud alert triggered. And by 4 p.m., I had the IRS fraud hotline on speaker explaining how suspicious recurring transfers from our joint account into an unlisted account were being flagged and that they'd be opening a file. And it was then, when I hung up the phone, that I realized I wasn't just exposing a cheating wife, I was dismantling a criminal who happened to share my last name. I sent every bit of evidence, screenshots, bank logs, hotel receipts, credit reports, pictures of her kissing her coworker, GPS logs from the AirTag I hid in her SUV, audio clips of her telling me she loved me while scheduling hotel check-ins with him, to my divorce attorney, who responded with, "Good, don't confront her yet, you're almost there." And with that green light, I forwarded everything to her HR department and to the hospital board because her little romantic fantasy wasn't just morally disgusting, it violated half a dozen workplace policies. She'd been having an affair with a coworker she supervised, using hospital time and hospital resources to text him, book rooms, and coordinate meetups, and I wasn't going to let that quietly slide by while she planned to walk away with half my assets. That night, around 8 p.m., I heard her SUV pull into the driveway much faster than usual, the tires screeching slightly as she braked, and when she stormed into the house, her purse half unzipped, her ID badge dangling sideways, hair messy from running her hands through it too many times, she looked shaken, like someone had pulled the floor out from beneath her second life, and she didn't know which way gravity was pulling anymore. She went straight to the kitchen, slammed her purse onto the counter, and said in a voice tight with panic, "Something's wrong with my accounts. I think someone hacked me." And I swear I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep my face from twisting into a smile because she genuinely believed she was the victim in all this. I leaned against the fridge, pretending concern, pretending confusion, pretending I wasn't the exact hacker who sabotaged her little fantasy future, and said, "What happened?" Like I hadn't spent the entire day making sure her whole world burned down. She told me the bank kept calling, her cards kept declining, her savings account looked weird, and she couldn't access one of her logins. Then she started pacing, muttering about needing to call the hospital's payroll office because maybe her deposits got mixed up. And watching her unravel like that, panicked, unprepared, clueless, was the first moment I felt anything other than numbness in weeks. She went to bed early, tossing and turning, checking her phone over and over, and by morning, the next wave of consequences slammed into her so hard I could practically hear the impact through the walls. Her lover's wife had received the evidence I anonymously sent, and in less than 2 hours she filed for separation, changed their home locks, and blasted him so thoroughly that he stopped responding to Emily altogether. At the same time, My wife was summoned to HR, where they informed her she was under investigation for misconduct, inappropriate workplace relationships, and misusing patient care hours for personal activity. And when she got home after that meeting, she wasn't panicking. She was shaking, red-eyed, hands trembling so hard she had to grip the back of a chair to stay balanced, and she whispered, "I think I'm in trouble." Like she hadn't just built an entire life behind my back with another man using my income as the damn foundation. I sat her down at the dining table, placed my phone on the wood with all the evidence pulled up. Messages, photos, receipts, logs, locations, everything. And as she realized what she was looking at, her face drained of every drop of color. She slid down onto her knees beside the chair like her legs simply gave out, grabbed my arm and started sobbing so violently it almost didn't sound human, begging, pleading, apologizing, saying she made a mistake, that she didn't mean to fall in love, that she never wanted to hurt me. But the moment she said that last part, I felt something inside me snap clean in half because she didn't just cheat. She didn't just lie. She didn't just hide a second life. She funded that life with my money, my credit, my identity, and the future I thought we were building together was nothing more than an expense account for her affair. So I looked her directly in the eyes, calm, emotionless, colder than I've ever sounded in my life, and said, "You didn't just cheat. You built a second life using my money." And watching the truth hit her, really hit her, was the closest thing to justice I had felt since the day I found that second phone. Because for the first time since this nightmare began, she finally understood that everything she built behind my back was collapsing, and there was absolutely nothing she could do to stop it. Walking into the courthouse that first morning felt less like entering a legal building and more like walking into the final battlefield of a war I never asked to fight but refused to lose. And the moment my wife stepped inside, hair limp, makeup smudged from crying in the car, clothes wrinkled from stress, it was clear she already knew this wasn't going to be a divorce. It was going to be an autopsy of the life she tried to build behind my back. My lawyer and I walked in with a binder so thick it looked like a college textbook, filled with everything she thought she'd hidden forever. Thousands of screenshots of messages where she told him she loved him, videos of them entering and leaving hotels, GPS logs tracking her nights of extra shifts, spreadsheets of financial trails showing the exact moments she siphoned money from our joint account, evidence of both credit card applications she forged under my name, bank statements highlighting every dollar she spent on her affair, IRS reports showing suspicious transfers, and even hospital policy violations tied directly to her behavior. And when the judge heard all of it laid out piece by piece, calmly, factually, professionally, my wife looked like she was shrinking inside her own skin, like she was watching an avalanche come down the mountain, but couldn't move fast enough to get out of its path. Her lawyer tried everything, claiming emotional instability, marital issues, stress from work, even hinting that maybe I misunderstood her intentions, but the judge didn't even blink. He stared at her over the rim of his glasses like she was a child caught stealing, then said her actions weren't just morally wrong, they were intentionally deceptive, financially abusive, and criminally fraudulent. And when he issued his ruling, I swear the entire courtroom air shifted as if someone had cut the tension with a knife. I was awarded the house, all shared property of real value, and 85% of the assets because I had been the sole financial provider and she had used marital funds for what the judge listed as unauthorized personal activities. She was assigned every bit of debt she created, including the fraudulent credit card balances, and was ordered to reimburse me for the identity theft damage I had documented. When she tried to object, her voice cracked so badly the judge had to ask her to sit down. Within a week, she received a letter confirming she was terminated from the hospital, misconduct, inappropriate workplace relationship, and misuse of patient care hours. And her former lover, who had disappeared the moment HR contacted him, blocked her on everything, including work email. I later found out his wife had taken half the assets, kicked him out, and filed a restraining order, not because of me, but because of the lies he told her. And the ripple effect of this entire thing was so massive that both of them went under in ways I couldn't have imagined even on my worst nights of suspicion. Her parents, who once adored me, now wouldn't even let her stay in their guest room because they didn't want legal trouble connected to them. So she ended up renting a tiny room above a garage from some family friend, drowning in debt she couldn't pay, jobless, reputation ruined, lover gone, and legally responsible for every financial bomb she planted under our marriage. And while she spiraled downward, I did something I hadn't done in years. I started rebuilding myself piece by piece. At first it felt strange having silence in the house again. Not tense silence, not suspicious silence, but peaceful silence, the kind you don't realize you've been missing until it's there every morning waiting for you. I spent extra hours at the gym, not as revenge, not to glow up, but because sweating out my anger felt cleaner than holding it. I started therapy and discovered a version of myself I hadn't met before. Someone calmer, more grounded, someone who didn't need to constantly prove his worth to a woman who never cared to value it. I traveled, Small trips at first, then bigger ones, reminding myself what freedom felt like without monitoring someone's lies. And somewhere in that journey, I adopted a dog from a local shelter, a goofy golden retriever who would flop onto my chest when I got home from work like he was protecting me from the ghosts she left behind. I reconnected with old friends, made new ones, learned to cook better than she ever knew how to, rebuilt my savings account, bought myself a new car, a car that wasn't shared, wasn't tainted, wasn't part of her second life, and for the first time in years, I stopped waking up with a knot in my stomach. Dating eventually came too, but slowly, carefully, with boundaries I never had before, and I realized that love isn't supposed to feel like surveillance or suspicion or emotional bookkeeping. It's supposed to feel like ease, like honesty, like air you can breathe without choking on. And as months passed and the legal dust settled, there was this moment. One quiet evening when I was sitting on my back porch with my dog asleep at my feet and a cold drink in my hand, when it finally hit me. She hadn't destroyed my life. She had freed me from hers. All her lies, all her betrayal, all her second life built behind my back. It didn't break me. It revealed the truth I refused to see. She wasn't my partner. She was a storm I kept pretending was weather I could survive. And when she finally left, when everything collapsed around her instead of me, I realized peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the absence of the person who caused it. The end. My wife said her ex was just a friend, until I learned why she kept disappearing every weekend. I swear I didn't notice the first few times my wife Riley disappeared for the weekend. Maybe because I didn't want to, or maybe because when you love someone so deeply that your entire emotional compass recalibrates itself around them, you naturally assume the best. You assume they're just tired, stressed, overwhelmed, and needing time to breathe, especially when your marriage has always functioned on trust. The kind of trust that feels stupidly pure in hindsight, like trusting a fragile vase not to crack even when someone keeps bumping the table beneath it. And maybe that's why the first Friday she told me she was heading out to meet an old friend for drinks, I didn't think twice. I even smiled, kissed her cheek, told her to have fun and say hi for me, thinking she'd be back by midnight. She wasn't. She came home late the next morning smelling like pine and cold air despite claiming she crashed at her friend Lily's place. But at the time, I shrugged it off because I'd spent years helping her rebuild herself after her brutal breakup with Caleb, the man who had torn her self-esteem down to nothing before she met me. So I thought she deserved every ounce of freedom and space she asked for. No questions asked. But then came the second weekend and the third, and by the time week 6 rolled around and every Friday carried that same pattern. Her brushing through the front door with an upbeat voice and vague words about mental health breaks, or solo hikes to clear her mind, or reconnecting with old friends who helped her through her 20s. I felt that creeping, familiar tightening in my chest, the one I used to feel in the ER when I knew something was wrong with a patient, even before the monitors confirmed it, and I started noticing the new details, the ones I'd been generously overlooking. The way Riley would toss random clothes into a duffel bag for what she called a quick coffee catch-up. The way her phone would suddenly go on Do Not Disturb until Monday morning. The way she'd return smelling of the same perfume she used back when she dated Caleb, a scent she stopped using years ago because it reminded her too much of him. Yet somehow it was back on her skin, faint but unmistakable, like a ghost trying to whisper a warning. And maybe a normal person would have just confronted her immediately, but I'm not that person. I'm Emily Hart, a 31-year-old ER nurse from Eugene who has spent her entire adult life believing that communication fixes everything, believing that if I'm patient, understanding, kind, loving, and steady, then the people I love will naturally feel safe enough to be honest with me. But that's the cruel irony. Sometimes the safer you make someone feel, the easier it is for them to lie to you, because they trust you won't question them. They trust your softness will cover their sharp edges. And as the weekends kept piling up, Riley's sharp edges started slicing through every bit of softness I had left. Not violently at first, but slowly, subtly, in tiny cuts, the half-truths, the rushed kisses, the distracted eyes when I asked simple questions, the way she dodged intimacy not just physically, but emotionally, as if she was already somewhere else long before her body followed. And I remember the exact moment the unease bloomed into something darker. It was a Sunday night around 11:30 p.m. when Riley walked in exhausted, clothes wrinkled, hair messy, with her hiking boots still muddy, and she said, "I really needed this reset, babe," then disappeared into the shower while I was taking laundry out of her duffel bag. And that's when I noticed a gas station receipt tucked into the side pocket. Not from anywhere near Eugene, but from a tiny mountain town 2 hours east, a place Riley had no reason to be near unless she was heading toward the cabins around the lake. The cabins she once described as her first home away from home when she dated Caleb years ago. The cabins where they spent weekends wrapped in blankets, drinking cheap wine, while she convinced herself he was her forever, until he broke her into pieces that I had to help gather from the floor. That night, I didn't sleep. Not even for a minute, because one question kept ringing in my mind like an emergency pager I couldn't shut off. Why is my wife driving toward the exact place she swore she'd never revisit? And once that question dug its claws into me, it didn't let go. Because Riley kept disappearing every Friday with new excuses. Brunch with the girls, mental detox weekend, planning old college reunion stuff, hiking with coworkers. And each excuse came with mismatched details that didn't align no matter how I rearranged them in my head. And trust me, I tried. I tried so damn hard because I didn't want to believe what every logical bone in my body was screaming, that the woman who once sobbed into my chest while promising she'd never betray me the way Caleb betrayed her was now betraying me with the same man. But I also wasn't ready to accuse her without proof, because love makes you terrified of being wrong, terrified of hurting someone by confronting them, terrified of what the truth might force you to do if you finally acknowledge it. So instead, I went quiet, observant, methodical, the way I am at work when a patient's vitals don't match their symptoms, and I started documenting everything, not obsessively, just carefully. Little notes on my phone about what she said, what she wore, what time she left, how long she was gone, comparing it to the receipts I happened to find, the toll charges, the mileage on her car, the crumbs of evidence she didn't bother to hide. And each piece added a new crack to the version of her I thought I knew. And through all of this, Riley continued smiling at me, continued kissing me goodbye, continued acting like everything was normal. Even though nothing about her felt normal anymore, her energy shifted in ways she probably didn't realize. She was more distant, irritable, restless, like she was living two lives and one of them was draining her too fast. And sometimes she'd stare off into space mid-sentence like she was replaying memories she couldn't share with me. Then one Friday evening, while she was packing yet another last-minute sleepover bag, I watched her hide her perfume in the bottom of the bag. The same floral amber blend she used to wear religiously for Caleb and hadn't touched since the day she cut ties with him. And my stomach dropped so violently I had to step into the hallway just to breathe, because I suddenly realized the pattern wasn't coincidental, it wasn't random, it wasn't emotional burnout or friend catch-ups or work retreats. It was intentional, deliberate, planned, and the secrecy wrapped around it all was suffocating. And that was the night something inside me finally shifted. Not in an explosive way, not in a dramatic, screaming, crying way, but in a cold, sharp, ER trauma room kind of clarity. The kind where you stop hoping and start analyzing, where you stop trusting and start observing, where you stop convincing yourself everything is fine and start preparing for the moment you'll have to face the truth no matter how deeply it cuts. And as I stood in that hallway watching the woman I married zip up a bag full of lies, realizing she had already emotionally left our home long before I noticed, I promised myself something quietly, internally, like a whispered vow only I could hear. I deserve to know who my wife really is and where she really goes when she disappears every weekend, and from that moment forward, every detail mattered, every inconsistency mattered, every mile driven, every cent she carried, every lie told with a straight face, every Sunday night exhaustion that wasn't from anything she claimed, and I finally allowed the unease to evolve into suspicion. Not petty suspicion, not jealous suspicion, but survival suspicion. The kind that tells you the life you built is not as stable as you believed, and if you don't protect yourself now, you'll crumble when the truth finally arrives. And even though I had no proof yet, even though I had no photos, no witness, no confession, I knew, deep in that instinctive place inside me that has saved patients on the brink of death when machines failed, that Riley wasn't just disappearing from home every weekend, she was disappearing from us, from our marriage, from the future we once painted in late night whispered conversations, and by the time she walked out the door that night with a breezy, "Love you, Em, don't wait up," I already began the quiet process of uncovering the truth, even if that truth was the very thing I feared most. I don't know what finally pushed me over the invisible edge between suspicion and action. Maybe it was the way Riley didn't even look me in the eye the Friday she told me she had a mandatory work retreat in Bend, when I knew for a fact her company's retreat had already happened back in June. Or maybe it was the way she packed 2 pairs of jeans, hiking boots, and her favorite wool sweater into her overnight bag while claiming she'd spend the whole weekend in conference rooms. Or maybe it was the way she kissed me goodbye like someone kissing a sibling, not a spouse, barely touching my cheek as if intimacy had become inconvenient. But whatever it was, it snapped something inside me quietly, cleanly, like the sound of cracked glass that nobody else hears. And before I even realized it, I found myself scrolling through listings for private investigators on my phone, while Riley was still loading her bag into her car. I had never done anything like that before, never imagined I would need to, but there was a calm desperation guiding me, a sense that if I didn't uncover the truth now, I would lose myself before I lost her. And that's how I found Marla Sanders, a PI whose website looked like it hadn't been updated since 2012, but whose reviews described her as discreet, skilled, and terrifyingly perceptive. And I remember my hands shaking slightly as I dialed her number, feeling like I was doing something criminal even though all I wanted was clarity. And when she picked up with a low, steady voice saying, "This is Marla," something in me loosened, like my instincts recognized safety. We met the next morning at a small, dusty diner on the edge of town, the kind of place truckers stop at before long drives. And Marla was nothing like the TV investigators I expected. She was older, maybe late 60s, with silver hair pulled into a braid, soft brown eyes, a faded denim jacket, and a face that looked like it had seen thousands of heartbreaks, but still cared enough to look gentle, not hardened. And when she listened to me explain the situation, she didn't raise an eyebrow, didn't judge, didn't interrupt, just nodded slowly like she had heard this story before in 100 different forms. When I finished, she said something that nearly made me cry right there at the table. "Sweetheart, people break the people who rebuild them. It's the oldest story in my line of work. But don't jump to conclusions. You could be wrong. Let me do the seeing for you." She said it with such steady compassion that my chest tightened painfully because I didn't want her to see anything. I wanted her to come back and tell me Riley had been honest, that I was paranoid, that my marriage was fine, but deep down, I knew I wouldn't get that outcome. Not with how Riley had been acting, not with the perfume, the receipts, the lies piling on lies like bricks building a wall between us. So I handed Marla a recent photo of Riley, a copy of her work schedule, the license plate number, and the address of the place Riley claimed her retreat was happening. Even though we both knew that was bullshit, and Marla simply nodded again, slid everything into her worn leather satchel, and told me she'd be in touch when she had something concrete. That week was the longest of my life. Every hour felt stretched thin. Every shift at the ER felt endless, and every night I lay awake staring at the ceiling, imagining scenarios I didn't want to imagine. Riley laughing with someone else, touching someone else, choosing someone else. And even though I tried to stay calm, a part of me was already bracing for the worst. When Marla finally texted me, "Got photos, need to meet," my stomach dropped so hard I thought I might faint. She suggested we meet at her office, a tiny cluttered space above a pawn shop with dusty blinds and the faint smell of old paper, and she didn't waste a second. She closed the door behind me, sat me down, and slid a manila envelope across the desk with the kind of gentle caution doctors use before delivering devastating diagnoses. My hands felt distant, numb, as I opened it and saw the first photograph. It was Riley and Caleb, together, standing casually outside a grocery store 2 towns over, like a couple on a Saturday morning errand run. Caleb's hand rested on the small of her back. Riley was smiling at him in that soft, vulnerable way she used to smile at me when we first met. My heart didn't crack. It shattered. But there were more photos. Dozens. Riley loading groceries into the back of Caleb's truck, Riley getting into the passenger seat while Caleb held the door open, Riley leaning her head on his shoulder while they walked toward the trailhead of a mountain road I recognized instantly, because she had described it to me 100 times as the road leading to her favorite cabin, the place she said she fell in love for the first time, the place she swore she never wanted to revisit because it held too many painful memories of him breaking her apart after promising forever. And now she was back there, with him, by choice. My throat tightened until swallowing hurt. The final set of photos showed them arriving at the cabin, unloading bags, laughing about something, moving with the familiarity of people who never needed to learn each other. They already knew. I stared at the picture so long my eyes burned, not because I didn't understand what I was seeing, but because I understood too well. Marla placed a gentle hand on my arm and said softly, "I'm sorry, Emily. I know this isn't what you hoped for." Her voice wasn't pitying, just sorrowful. The kind of sorrow that comes from having delivered this news to too many hopeful spouses. And I nodded weakly because my voice had disappeared somewhere inside the grief that was consuming me whole. I took the photos home, placed them on the kitchen table, and sat there for nearly 2 hours, staring, remembering everything Riley and I had been through. The late night talks when she thought she'd never love again after Caleb. The mornings I held her through panic attacks. The years I spent reminding her she was worthy. The way she once looked at me like I saved her life every time I helped her through another emotional spiral. The 5 years I waited patiently until she finally felt healed enough to marry me, promising we'd never hurt each other like our past had hurt us. And now this. The betrayal wasn't just infidelity. It was history repeating itself. But this time I was the one being broken by the same man who once destroyed her. Like some twisted, cyclical tragedy none of us could escape. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream or cry or call her or text her. I didn't even touch the photos again for the rest of the night. Instead, I went into a mode I recognized from trauma cases at the hospital. Focused, numb, silent. I gathered everything. The photos, the receipts, the mileage logs I'd quietly saved, the notes on my phone documenting her excuses, the faint scent of perfume she wore only for him. The timeline of every weekend she had vanished with increasingly flimsy explanations. I didn't gather them for revenge. I gathered them for truth. Because once someone lies this deeply, you stop trusting words and start trusting evidence. I organized everything into a folder I hid at the back of my closet behind old winter coats. And when Riley came home Sunday night smelling like pine and mountain cold again, I didn't ask anything. I didn't accuse her. I didn't reveal even a flicker of what I knew. I simply looked at her, really looked at her, and realized with a hollow ache that the woman standing in front of me was no longer the woman I married. She wasn't mine anymore. Maybe she hadn't been for a long time. And even though my heart felt like it had been torn from my chest, I held the truth silently, waiting for the moment everything would finally unravel on its own, because I knew now that it inevitably would, and when it did, I needed to be ready. Not to save her, not to fix her, but to save myself. I don't think anything could have prepared me for the moment I finally confronted Riley, because even though I had rehearsed 100 versions of that conversation in my mind, some calm, some angry, some heartbroken, some ice cold, none of them resembled the surreal hollowness of the real thing. The way my voice came out steadier than I felt, the way my hands didn't shake even though my insides felt like shattered glass, or the way Riley looked at me, wide-eyed and blinking fast, like she genuinely couldn't tell whether I had found out the truth or whether I was about to ask her something innocent, like what she wanted for dinner. It happened on a Tuesday evening, 2 days after her latest mental health weekend, when I placed the manila folder, yes, the same one filled with photos, logs, receipts, and proof, on the dining table between us and simply said, "We need to talk." And the second those words left my mouth, her entire body stiffened, like she'd been caught in the middle of doing something wrong and didn't know which version of the truth she had prepared was appropriate to deploy. And for a moment, we just stared at each other, frozen, like two people silently daring the other to break the stillness first. When I told her I knew she hadn't been at a work retreat, her eyes flicked downward for half a second, a tiny involuntary flash of panic she tried to hide by forcing a laugh and saying, "What are you talking about, Em?" Of course I was at the retreat, but there was something brittle in her voice, something shaky behind the fake casualness, and when I opened the folder and slid the first photo toward her and Caleb standing outside the grocery store, her entire facade cracked. She froze, her face draining of color, her hand gripping the edge of the chair like she needed it to steady herself. But then, unbelievably, she denied it. She stared at the photo, blinked twice, and said, "This isn't what it looks like," even though it was exactly what it looked like. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice. I just said, "Riley, I know. Please don't lie anymore." And that's when she shifted tactics so fast it made my stomach turn. The same way a patient shifts from denial to bargaining when they realize the diagnosis is real. First, she blamed nostalgia, claiming she just wanted to reconnect with a part of her past, that being around Caleb helped her understand who she used to be, as if that explained driving 2 hours every weekend and staying overnight in a cabin with him. Then, when she saw nostalgia wasn't convincing me, she pivoted to emotional clarity, saying she needed space to think, because marriage had gotten too suffocating lately, which stunned me so deeply I couldn't even respond for a moment, because this same woman who cried with gratitude the day we bought this house together, now claimed our life was suffocating. Then, realizing that excuse wasn't landing, she switched again, saying Caleb just needed someone to talk to, and she was trying to help him through a rough time, as if him loading groceries into his truck while holding her waist counted as therapy. Each excuse grew more desperate, more hollow, more absurd, and I just watched her unravel with this quiet, painful disbelief, because every version of the truth she offered only made the real truth more obvious. She was lying, repeatedly, deliberately, with rehearsed lines she must have used on herself every weekend to justify what she was doing. And then, in the middle of her spiraling explanations, she blurted out the line that broke me in a way I hadn't expected. "I didn't cheat, I just needed to remember who I was." It hit like a slap. Not because of the words themselves, but because of the selfishness behind them. She didn't cheat. She disappeared every weekend. She lied every weekend. She went back to the man who wrecked her life the first time. She stayed in a cabin with him. She kissed him. I'd seen enough in the photos to know that much. But suddenly, her betrayal wasn't betrayal because she labeled it something else. Because she framed it as self-discovery instead of destruction. And I think something inside me shut off in that moment. Like someone flipped a switch and the emotional connection between us went dark. Because I realized she wasn't lying to protect me. She was lying to protect the fragile fantasy she'd built for herself. The fantasy that she could revisit the past without hurting the present. That she could chase old emotions without breaking the person who had held her through every breakdown Caleb caused. I stood up, walked away from the table, and for the first time in our entire marriage, I didn't try to fix her. Didn't try to understand her. Didn't try to smooth over the cracks. I just said, "I'm done listening to excuses," grabbed my keys, and left the house before the grief consumed me. I drove aimlessly for an hour, ended up parked outside a closed bookstore downtown, and sat there in my car staring at the empty street while my heart cracked open in a way that felt oddly quiet, like grief simmering instead of exploding. I didn't cry. Not then, because I wasn't ready to feel it yet, but I knew something irreversible had shifted inside me. Over the next 2 days, Riley walked around the house like a ghost, sending me long texts while I worked at the hospital, saying things like, "I'm sorry you're hurt, and I just needed clarity, and I didn't think you'd react like this," as if my reaction was the problem, not her choices. And each message made me detach a little more, moving me closer to the emotional exit I didn't know I'd already been walking toward. And then the real breaking point arrived, not from Riley, but from Caleb himself, who showed up at our house unannounced on a Thursday afternoon while I was home early for morning shift, knocking on my front door with a smug expression like he owned the place. I recognized him instantly from the photos. Tall, broad-shouldered, with that arrogant confidence some men wear like cologne. The type who thinks charm excuses every flaw. And before I could even decide whether to slam the door in his face, he said, "You must be Emily. Can we talk?" in a tone that suggested he was doing me a favor. I didn't invite him in. I stepped outside, closed the door behind me, and crossed my arms, refusing to give him a shred of comfort, and he smirked like it amused him. Then he leaned against the porch railing and said, completely casually, "Look, I figured she'd blow things up eventually, but I didn't think she'd throw away her marriage over it." And I stared at him, stunned, not just by the words themselves, but by his tone, light, careless, like he was discussing weekend sports instead of the implosion of my life. He went on, shrugging as if the whole thing was no big deal. "I didn't want her back, if that's what you're thinking. God, no. I've been through 2 divorces already. I'm not looking for more drama." He said it with a laugh, then added, "She just needed the attention, I guess. She's always been like that. She needed someone to admire her. I figured she'd get over it eventually." The casual cruelty of it left me speechless for a moment, because in those few sentences he revealed everything Riley hadn't. He never wanted her back. He never loved her. He never planned a future with her. He just enjoyed the ego boost of being wanted, of being chased by someone who still carried old wounds he once carved into her. She wasn't rekindling some profound romantic connection like she'd convinced herself. She was feeding a man's boredom, and he admitted all of this without shame, without hesitation, even chuckling at one point like it was all ridiculous fun for him. And I felt something cold settle inside my chest. Not heartbreak, not grief, but clarity, sharp and decisive, because in that moment I finally understood. I didn't lose my wife to love, or passion, or fate, or destiny. I lost her to delusion, nostalgia, and a man who didn't even care enough to pretend he cared. And somehow, knowing that hurt less than imagining she had found something real with him. When he left, still smirking as if he'd enlightened me, I stood on the porch for a long time, letting the cold Oregon wind numb my face as the truth solidified in my bones. Riley hadn't betrayed me for love. She had betrayed me for emptiness, and I wasn't going to let emptiness destroy me any further. I left quietly, not dramatically, not with some cinematic slamming of doors or screaming in the hallway, but with the kind of calm that only comes when your heart has shattered so completely that there is nothing left to break. And I remember packing my suitcase on a rainy Wednesday morning while Riley was still asleep, her phone buzzing on the nightstand with those same late-night texts from friends she suddenly couldn't name. And as I zipped the bag shut, I realized I wasn't running away. I was finally walking toward myself for the first time in years. I filed for divorce the same afternoon, sitting in my car in the courthouse parking lot, long enough for my hands to stop shaking, and even though the clerk barely looked up when she took my paperwork, something inside me settled, like my soul finally exhaled after months of being suffocated. I moved into a tiny downtown apartment with peeling paint, ancient radiators, and a view of a brick wall, yet it felt more like home than the house Riley and I had shared for 5 years, because at least this place didn't lie to me, didn't pretend to love me while sneaking off to cabins with the one person who had once destroyed her. In those early weeks, I rediscovered things I didn't know I'd lost. Cooking meals for myself instead of trying to guess what mood Riley would be in that night. Working extra shifts because anything was better than sitting alone with the memory of her half-truths. Going to therapy where a soft-spoken counselor helped me untangle the mess in my head, reminding me that healing isn't about pretending you're fine, but about learning how to stand even when everything beneath you feels unstable. I began reconnecting with friends I'd accidentally pushed aside while trying to be Riley's emotional life support. And it felt strange how warmly they welcomed me back, how none of them said, "I told you so," even though they absolutely could have, and slowly the numbness gave way to grief, then anger, then clarity, and I started living again. Not big, not loud, just quietly, one steady breath at a time. Meanwhile, Riley spiraled hard, and I heard it through mutual friends, though I never went digging. Caleb blocked her the moment she became inconvenient. Her friends faded because apparently it's easier to gossip than support someone. And she kept sending me long, emotional paragraphs about mistakes and confusion and how she never meant to hurt me. All of which I ignored except for the strictly necessary legal replies, because loving her once didn't mean I owed her forever, and there was a strange peace in not responding, like reclaiming my voice by refusing to give it to someone who had crushed it. The divorce finalized with no dramatic courtroom scene, just a few signatures and a strange emptiness afterward. And for the first time in a long while, I sat in my tiny apartment, let the silence fill the space, and realized I wasn't lonely. I was free. Months passed, seasons shifted, and somewhere in the middle of healing and rebuilding, I met Jordan. A paramedic with steady eyes and a quiet laugh that didn't demand attention, but somehow held it anyway. And it wasn't fireworks or obsession or the kind of drama I once mistook for passion. It was simple, consistent presence, the kind of stability I didn't know how badly I needed until I had it. Jordan asked me questions about my day, not out of obligation, but genuine interest. Remembered small things I didn't even notice, I said. Held my hand without gripping it too tightly. And loved me in a way that didn't hurt, didn't confuse, didn't leave me guessing whether I was enough. I realized one evening while we were sitting on my thrifted couch eating takeout noodles that I didn't need a grand love story with twists and big declarations. I needed a calm one. The kind that doesn't demand you to shrink so it can shine. The kind that grows quietly and steadily like sunrise instead of crashing like a storm. Meanwhile, Riley ended up exactly where her choices guided her. Alone, chasing after a man who had never cared about her healing, her heart, or her future. And the sad part is she still couldn't see that I wasn't the villain in her story. She was her own undoing. And for the first time, that truth didn't hurt me anymore. Closing this chapter of my life wasn't about revenge or proving anything. It was about finally choosing myself after years of living at the mercy of someone else's unresolved past. And the freedom that came with it wasn't loud or triumphant. It was soft, steady, real, the quiet kind of happiness that stays, the kind that builds a life, the kind I always deserved but never believed I could have until I walked away from the woman who never stayed for weekends, yet somehow taught me exactly how to never abandon myself again. The end. My wife lied about therapy sessions. What she was actually doing broke me, and then pushed me to rise. I guess every marriage has a moment where you realize something is breaking, even if you can't see the crack yet. And for me, it started on an ordinary Tuesday morning in our home in Columbus, Ohio, when my wife, Emily, sat across from me at the breakfast table stirring her coffee like she was auditioning for a commercial about avoiding eye contact. And I remember thinking, how did we get here? Because it wasn't one big fight or betrayal back then, just a slow, suffocating drift, a silent erosion of everything that once made us us. The playful inside jokes that used to spark during late night grocery runs, the random forehead kisses, the stupid disagreements about whether pineapple belonged on pizza, all of it had faded into this heavy emptiness that hung between us, and when we finally agreed to couples therapy, I swear a part of me exhaled for the first time in months, like, maybe we weren't doomed yet. Maybe we could actually fix the cracks before they split completely. And I remember our therapist, Dr. Harrington, a soft-spoken woman with glasses too big for her face, telling us that communication was our biggest issue. Emily shut down when she felt overwhelmed. I got louder when I felt ignored, and it created this loop of hurt and defensiveness that neither of us knew how to break. And after only 2 sessions, she suggested individual therapy alongside couples sessions, something to help each of us unpack personal stress before bringing it into the marriage. And Emily agreed so quickly it almost startled me, like she'd been waiting for someone to give her permission to step away. At first, I was proud of her, genuinely proud, because for months she had looked exhausted, mentally somewhere far from home, barely sleeping, barely speaking, and seeing her actually excited to better herself made me feel hopeful. Like maybe she was choosing us again after a long time of choosing everything else. Work, friends, silence, distance over me. But then things got strained in small, subtle ways I almost ignored, like how she suddenly started dressing up for therapy days, wearing outfits she normally reserved for date nights or office parties, doing her hair, spraying on perfume. And when I teased her lightly about looking fancy for a mental health appointment, she smiled in this vague, distracted way and said, "It makes me feel better." And I didn't question it because therapy is vulnerable and personal, and maybe she wanted to show up feeling confident. But then she began coming home later, telling me her sessions ran long or that she went for a walk afterward to decompress, and she'd return smiling at texts she kept tilted away from me, her excuses stacking up so neatly that my brain kept telling me they had to be true. Who lies during therapy? Who lies about trying to fix a marriage? But my chest grew tight anyway, like my instincts were whispering something I didn't want to hear. The first crack appeared when I opened the mail one afternoon and saw an invoice from Dr. Harrington's office, and at first I smiled, assuming it was just a billing update, until I noticed it listed only my name, not hers, and my stomach dropped because she had supposedly gone to 2 solo sessions by then. So why was I the only one billed? I told myself it was a clerical mistake. Therapists mix up paperwork all the time. No need to panic, but the seed was planted, the uneasy voice in my mind no longer whispering, but humming quietly, like background static. Then, a week later, I found a restaurant receipt stuffed into Emily's coat pocket, something she must have forgotten, dated on a day she told me she cried in therapy about how overwhelmed she felt. And the time on the receipt, 3:42 p.m., was right in the middle of her supposed appointment. And it wasn't some quick takeout place either, but a sit-down bistro downtown, one we used to go to when we were newly married, and the waiter's handwritten note at the bottom read, "Hope you two enjoy your afternoon," with a little smiley face. And when I saw that, my throat tightened so hard I nearly choked, because who was it to? I put the receipt back exactly where I found it, telling myself not to jump to conclusions, to breathe, to trust her. But trust is a lot like glass. Once a single hairline crack forms, it spreads with every breath, every thought, every tiny doubt. Still, I tried to be rational. I tried to believe the best of her until the moment I checked our joint credit card bill for a subscription charge and my eyes caught 3 separate transactions from a downtown hotel, all on days she claimed she was in therapy, all between 2 p.m. and 4 p.m. And that's when my vision went blurry and my hands started shaking because there was no logical explanation left to hide behind. No innocent misunderstanding, no therapist error, just the cold truth tightening around me like a noose. I stared at those charges for almost an hour, pacing, breathing hard, grabbing the kitchen counter like it might not steady me. And I remember whispering to myself, please God, let this be something else. Because the idea that the woman I had built a life with, the woman I protected, loved, trusted, would lie to me while pretending to heal our marriage. It hollowed me out in a way I can't even describe. But even then, I didn't confront her. Not yet. Because I needed to see it with my own eyes. Needed the truth to punch me in the face before I let myself believe my marriage was collapsing behind my back. So, the next Thursday, I called in sick to work, parked my car 3 streets away from our house, waited until she drove off for her therapy session, and I followed her, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles turned white, every mile tearing me apart, because some part of me still hoped she would pull into the therapist slot. Still hoped I was the crazy one inventing problems in a marriage she was trying to save. But she didn't turn toward Dr. Harrington's office. Instead, she drove straight downtown, right to the hotel from the credit card statement, and my breath left my body like someone punched me in the ribs, but I forced myself to keep watching, to stay awake inside the nightmare. I saw her park, check her hair in the mirror, fix her lipstick she hadn't worn for me in months, and then she stepped out, and I remember thinking how beautiful she looked, how much I loved her, how much this was about to destroy me. And then a man stepped out of a different car 2 spaces away, walking confidently toward her like he had every right to her smile. And when she saw him, my wife, lit up in a way I hadn't seen in years, like she had saved her brightest expression for someone else. And before I could even swallow the pain, she wrapped her arms around him, and then they kissed, deeply, easily, like they'd done it 100 times. And I froze, my entire world cracking open because I recognized him instantly. Recognized the face she once told me belonged to a married coworker she barely knew. A guy she once admitted having a small stupid crush on years ago. Nothing important. And as they pulled away from each other, I saw the flash of a silver band on his left hand. He was wearing a wedding ring, and the sickening realization hit me all at once. My wife wasn't going to therapy. She wasn't trying to fix our marriage. She was meeting another married person behind my back, and the life I thought we were rebuilding had already been burned to ash by the 2 people standing in front of that hotel like they deserved each other. My heartbeat thundered so loudly I could barely hear anything else, and I remember gripping the steering wheel with sweat-drenched palms, telling myself not to throw up, not to scream, not to run out of the car and tear the universe apart in front of that damn hotel entrance, because no matter how deep the betrayal felt, I needed to understand the full truth before I burned everything down. So I sat there, trembling, watching the woman I had chosen over every other life path walk into a hotel with another man. Like it was the most natural thing in the world, and time seemed to stretch and warp around me as I waited, swallowing wave after wave of panic until I genuinely thought my chest might cave in. And in those moments of agonizing stillness, a brutal highlight reel of our marriage replayed in my mind. Our vows, our first apartment, with its peeling wallpaper and broken heater. The night she cried in my arms because her father disapproved of us. The way she used to look at me like I was her home. And it made everything feel like a joke I hadn't realized I was the punchline of. After nearly an hour of staring at the hotel entrance like it might give me answers, they finally emerged, laughing, her hand resting casually on his arm, his thumb brushing her waist in a way that looked too comfortable, too practiced, and when he leaned down to kiss her again before they parted, I swear something inside me snapped so loudly I felt it in my bones, because it wasn't just the cheating, it was the ease of it, the confidence, the routine, like this wasn't a desperate mistake but a second life she'd grown comfortable living. She walked back to her car with a glow I hadn't seen in so long. A glow she didn't bother bringing home to me. And as she drove off, probably rehearsing whatever lies she'd feed me about processing difficult emotions in therapy, I sat frozen, staring at the spot where they'd just been, every breath feeling like a blade shoved between my ribs, and I remember whispering, why? Even though no answer could possibly make this less devastating. I waited a few minutes before I followed her home, just far enough behind that she wouldn't notice, and the entire drive I felt like I was dissolving from the inside out. Like my insides had been replaced with cement and grief and anger, so tangled together I couldn't separate one from the other. And when she finally parked in our driveway and walked inside with her purse swinging casually over her shoulder, it shattered me that she could move so effortlessly between 2 worlds while I could barely breathe in one. I sat in my car outside the house for a long time, long enough to watch her silhouette move through our living room window, kicking off her shoes, humming softly as she lit one of those lavender candles she always said helped her reset after therapy. And hearing that lie echo in my mind again nearly made me punch the dashboard, but I didn't, because anger was the one thing I still felt somewhat in control of. Panic wasn't, Heartbreak wasn't. But anger I could contain, at least for now. I finally walked inside, wiping my face to make sure nothing betrayed me, and she greeted me with a soft smile, one so familiar it almost made me collapse, and she kissed my cheek lightly, telling me therapy had been really emotionally heavy today. And she said it with such practiced sadness that for a split second, I wondered how long she'd been rehearsing these lines. How many times she'd stood in a hotel mirror perfecting her story so I wouldn't see the lipstick smudge or the guilt in her eyes. We made dinner together like any other Thursday, her chopping vegetables while I stirred sauce, her phone face down on the counter buzzing occasionally with notifications she pretended not to see. And every time she laughed or touched my arm, it felt like gasoline poured over a fire burning inside my chest because I couldn't understand how she could cheat on me in a hotel room with a married coworker and then come home and saute onions with me like we were still the couple who used to dance barefoot in the kitchen to old country songs. That night, when she fell asleep beside me as if nothing in her world was wrong, I stared at the ceiling in the dark, replaying every sign I'd missed, every moment I dismissed as stress or exhaustion or miscommunication. And the longer I lay there, the more I realized this wasn't some spontaneous, heat-of-the-moment mistake. This was a pattern, a routine, something she had nurtured while I was busy trying to save us. I quietly slipped out of bed, walked to the guest room, and sat in the darkness with my phone glowing in my palm as I opened our credit card statement again, scrolling through each charge with a growing sense of horror as I saw how consistent the pattern was, how meticulously she had planned these rendezvous on alternating Thursdays, how every therapy breakthrough she had shared with me was likely a recycled line from whatever romantic fantasy she'd built with that man, and by the time I closed the app, my entire soul felt scraped raw. I knew then that my life had split into before and after, and there was no gluing the pieces back together. But what gutted me most was the realization that she seemed so happy. She wasn't conflicted or tormented or distant. She was glowing, lighter, freer, and the thought that she might have already emotionally left our marriage while I was still clinging to the idea of healing felt like someone had reached into my chest and ripped something vital out. The next morning, she woke up cheerful, humming while brushing her teeth, packing her lunch, telling me she was proud of both of us for doing the work in therapy, and I had to step into the hallway and press my hand to the wall just to steady myself because the urge to scream the truth in her face was so overwhelming I felt it in my fingertips. But I didn't, because as much as the betrayal was crushing me, a dark, cold clarity had begun forming beneath the chaos. I couldn't confront her until I had everything, until the truth was airtight, until she couldn't gaslight me or twist this into something else. Because if she could lie so flawlessly about therapy for weeks, what would she do when cornered? Cry? Apologize? Flip the story on me? No. I needed undeniable proof, and seeing her kiss him outside that hotel was only the beginning. I had no idea then just how deep her lies went, how long this had been happening, or how much more I was about to uncover as the days unfolded. But standing there in the hallway of our home, listening to her hum after cheating on me less than 24 hours earlier, I promised myself one thing. I would not let her destroy me without knowing exactly who she had become behind my back and whatever truth was waiting for me in the shadows. I was finally ready to face it. That promise became the only thing holding me together over the next few days, because every interaction with her felt like walking through a minefield of lies. Each smile she gave me stretched so thin it practically cracked under its own weight, and I found myself studying her, not lovingly the way I used to, but analytically, like I was observing a stranger pretending to play my wife. Noticing every detail I once overlooked, the way she texted with her phone tilted away, the new perfume she wore only on therapy days, the little giggles she tried to hide behind the rim of her coffee mug when her phone buzzed, the sudden surge of confidence that didn't come from healing but from being desired by someone else. And the more I watched, the more I realized how blind I had been, how desperately I had wanted to believe we were fixing things while she was building an entirely different fantasy behind my back. In the evenings, while she showered, I'd sit on the edge of our bed scrolling through our statements again, cross-checking times, places, travel routes, constructing a timeline that felt like watching myself slowly drown in real time. And every new piece of evidence made it harder to breathe, harder to sleep, harder to pretend I wasn't shattering internally. I started waking up before dawn because my mind wouldn't stay quiet, sitting alone in the dark living room, thinking about all the stupid moments I defended her, all the arguments where I apologized just to keep the peace, all the times she claimed she needed space because she was emotionally drained, when now I knew she was probably just recovering from an afternoon in a hotel bed that wasn't ours. But I hid all of it behind a neutral face, because I knew confronting her now would only give her time to sanitize the truth, erase messages, manipulate the narrative, and I needed everything, every piece of proof, every detail, so when she finally broke, she'd crumble under the weight of her own actions. I knew I had to follow her again, just once more, to confirm it wasn't a one-time meeting, to see if this was truly a routine and not some twisted slip-up. So the next Thursday, I told her I had a long shift and wouldn't be home until late, and she nodded casually, almost too casually, telling me she was going to therapy again and then probably grabbing a smoothie afterward because trauma work makes her dehydrated. And hearing her use therapy language to glue her lies together made something inside me rot. But I smiled anyway, kissed her forehead, and left for work before circling back and parking a few blocks away again. Heart pounding in that sickening rhythm I'd begun to recognize as the sound of my reality collapsing. When she finally left, I followed her carefully, more cautiously than last time, staying far enough behind that I wouldn't catch her attention. And once again, she took the same route. The same turns, the same exit toward downtown, like she'd been doing this drive so long it had become muscle memory, and sure enough, she pulled into the same hotel lot like she had a reserved space just for betrayal. And when the same man arrived seconds later, stepping out of his car with that smug confidence I instantly despised, everything inside me twisted into a nauseating knot. This time, they didn't hesitate. They kissed immediately, like two people who had no need to hide anymore, her hand sliding into his hair while his arms wrapped around her waist, and watching it felt like my lungs had been replaced with broken glass. They walked inside together again, disappearing into the revolving doors like two ghosts haunting the ruins of my marriage. And I sat there for nearly an hour in a haze of numb rage, staring blankly at the hotel windows while cars passed by and people lived their normal lives, unaware that mine had split open in the middle of a parking lot. When they finally emerged, they looked even more comfortable than before, like seasoned partners in crime. And when he whispered something in her ear that made her laugh in a way she hadn't laughed with me in months, it felt like a knife twisting deeper in my chest. She touched his arm before they parted, a gesture so intimate and familiar it made my hands tremble on the steering wheel. And watching her walk back to her car with that soft, satisfied smile turned my blood cold because she looked fulfilled, emotionally and physically, in a way I hadn't seen in so long. And realizing that another married man, was the one giving her that glow made me feel like my entire world had been set on fire. I drove home before she did, parking a block away so she wouldn't suspect anything. And when she walked through the door later, she threw her arms around me with this fake, exhausted sigh, telling me therapy had been intense but good. And I hugged her back while swallowing the urge to scream, my hand steady even though my soul felt like it was being peeled apart layer by layer. She showered earlier that night, claiming she wanted to wash the day off. And when she stepped out, wrapped in a towel, smelling like hotel soap, I nearly broke. Because the scent wasn't ours. It wasn't from our bathroom. It was the same one from those little hotel bottles they leave by the sink. The ones I recognized instantly from business trips. And I stood in the hallway, gripping the doorframe so hard my knuckles popped as she walked past me, humming softly, oblivious to the fact that every molecule of her was betraying her lies. That night, lying in bed next to her, while she drifted into an innocent sleep, I stared at the ceiling with my heart pounding so violently I wondered if she could hear it. And that was the moment I fully understood the depth of what she'd done. Not just the cheating, not just the hotel rooms, not just the lies she fed me while looking into my eyes, but the fact that she had looked at our broken marriage, the one I poured everything into trying to save, and decided that instead of fixing it, she would build a secret life behind my back. A life with a man she once claimed she barely knew, a man who was wearing a wedding ring, a man whose wife probably had no idea she was being betrayed to. And as I lay there, in the dark, listening to my wife breathe peacefully beside me, I realized my marriage wasn't slipping away. It had already drowned, quietly, secretly, long before I discovered the truth. And now that I'd seen the real depth of her deception, there was no going back. No unseeing, no forgiving, no rebuilding, only the cold, brutal clarity that the woman next to me wasn't the person I married, and the life I thought we had was nothing but a story I'd been telling myself while she lived another one entirely. That clarity didn't come peacefully. It hit with the force of a wrecking ball, leaving me shaking in the dark with a rage so cold and quiet it scared me, because it wasn't the explosive anger you see in movies. It was the kind that settles in your bones, the kind that whispers instead of screams, the kind that builds planes instead of throwing punches. And as the night stretched on, I realized I wasn't dealing with an impulsive fling or a drunken mistake or some emotional misstep born out of stress. This was a full-blown, organized affair with patterns and routines and lies crafted carefully enough to fool me for weeks, maybe months. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized she must have been planning this long before therapy even began. Because therapy wasn't her crying for help or trying to save us. It was her cover story, her alibi, her perfect little shield that allowed her to cheat in daylight without suspicion. And that realization cracked something inside me so deeply, I felt it reverberate in my teeth. I spent the next few days functioning like a hollowed out version of myself, going to work, running errands, cooking dinner, pretending everything was fine, while inside I was building a timeline, connecting dots, remembering moments that didn't make sense before but now snapped into place like puzzle pieces, revealing a sickening picture. The late nights at the office she said were team deadlines, the sudden need to clear her head with solo drives, the time she came home flushed and flustered, claiming she got emotional in therapy, and even the weekend she said she needed to journal alone. All of it swirling together like smoke from a fire I hadn't realized had been burning for months behind my back. The hardest part was how effortlessly she played her role, how good she was at it, how she'd lean her head on my shoulder during couples therapy sessions and talk about a feeling disconnected and sad, how she cried about wanting us to work, about wanting to be better, all while sleeping with another married man in hotel rooms we drove past on date nights. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, was that I believed her, I trusted her, I defended her, and that shame wrapped itself around my throat every time I thought about it. One night, while she slept, curled up on her side, facing away from me, I finally pulled out my laptop and created a separate folder, private, encrypted, hidden within another hidden folder, and started storing every piece of evidence I had. Screenshots of transactions, photos of receipts, time logs, even a picture I had secretly taken of them outside the hotel the second time I followed her, her lips on his hand on her waist, a perfect snapshot of the moment my marriage flatlined. And as the file loaded onto my screen, I felt something shift in me. Not despair, not rage, but a strange sense of preparation. Like I was building the foundation for something inevitable, something final. I didn't know when I would confront her, or how, or what words I'd use, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. When the moment came, I wouldn't be going into it blind, and she wouldn't be able to twist us into misunderstandings or emotional confusion, because I had everything, and she had no idea her perfect performance spot was unraveling. Over the next week, I kept watching her through this new lens of painful clarity, noticing every lie she let slip so casually they felt rehearsed. Her claiming traffic made her late when her location history showed she wasn't anywhere near the freeway. Her saying she was exhausted from therapy when she came home with makeup too perfect to have cried. Her hugging me tighter than usual like she was soothing her own guilt, rather than offering genuine affection. And I played along, every smile I returned costing me a little piece of my sanity, but I held on because I needed her to stay comfortable, predictable, routine. And then came the night that sealed everything for me. The night she crawled into bed smelling faintly of hotel soap again, her hair damp from a shower she claimed she took at the gym because she sweated more than usual. And as she kissed my cheek and whispered, "Good night, babe," something inside me finally stopped breaking. Not because it healed, but because it hardened. It was the moment I accepted that my marriage wasn't experiencing a rough patch. It was over, and the only thing left was a slow, methodical process of peeling away the last layers of her deception until the truth stood bare and ugly in the light. I didn't sleep much that night or any night after because once you see your partner's betrayal with clarity, sleep feels like a luxury you no longer deserve. But lying awake beside her, listening to her breathe so peacefully after destroying the life we built, I made a second promise to myself, one that would shape everything that came next. I would not let this break me. I would not collapse under her lies, and I would not lose myself in the ruins of a marriage she had already abandoned long before I ever realized it. Because if she could create a second life behind my back, then I could create a plan behind hers. A plan she would never see coming. A plan that would expose every hidden truth she thought she had buried. A plan that would ensure when the final confrontation came, she would have no escape, no excuses, no wiggle room, only the harsh, unfiltered consequences of the betrayal she carried so lightly, while I carried its weight like a stone tied to my chest. And as I finally closed my eyes just before sunrise, exhausted but strangely steady, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. This wasn't the moment my life fell apart. This was the moment I began preparing to rise from everything she thought would destroy me. I didn't confront her, not because I was weak, but because somewhere deep inside me, a switch flipped the moment I watched her kiss him. Like something inside me died and something else woke up. Quieter, but sharper. And instead of exploding or begging or questioning, I chose silence. The kind of silence that feels like armor being slowly strapped on piece by piece. And every morning after that day, I woke up beside the woman I still loved and acted like nothing was wrong, pretending I didn't know she was lying to my face, pretending her therapy appointments weren't trips to a downtown hotel, pretending her soft "I love yous" weren't recycled lines she whispered to someone else hours earlier. And I would watch her grab her purse with this new excitement in her eyes, applying a shade of lipstick she never wore for me, choosing outfits she used to reserve for date nights with me, breathing out this light, airy laugh she never gave me anymore. And she'd say she was going to therapy to work on her heart, and I'd smile like a man who didn't know his heart was being torn apart by the same hands that claimed to heal it. And after she left, I would stand in the quiet of our living room with this cold, hollow ache inside me, while my phone tracked her car location with each stop, each pause, each detour that lined up perfectly with the hotel receipts I found, and that became my routine. Wake up, pretend, Watch her leave, track her, break a little more, and somehow get stronger at the same time. Like every lie she told forged another layer of resolve inside me until one day I started documenting everything. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted freedom, and freedom required proof. So I became almost robotic about it, taking screenshots of credit card charges, saving bank statements, organizing timestamps, filing receipts, even printing out photos of her walking into the hotel, because I knew that when I finally walked out of this marriage, I would walk out clean, clear, and unblamed. And the more I prepared, the more invisible I felt inside my own home, like I was fading out of a life I built brick by brick. And yet she seemed happier than I'd seen her in years, talking more, humming while cooking, buying new clothes she claimed were for therapy confidence building, wearing new perfume she said made her feel powerful, even buying lingerie I never saw, telling me therapy was helping her find herself emotionally. And all I could think was, yeah, you definitely found something, but it sure as hell isn't yourself. And as messed up as it sounds, I still loved her. Not the woman she was becoming, but the woman I married, the woman I believed in, the woman I thought was honest, faithful, safe. And that love made everything worse because every day I could feel it dying slowly, painfully, piece by piece, like watching a house you built with your own hands collapse in slow motion. And the guilt of still loving someone who was destroying you was its own form of torture. But it also fueled me, made me more disciplined, more methodical, and that's when I started doing the things no husband wants to do. Meeting with a lawyer in secret, opening a private bank account she didn't know existed, removing myself from her phone plan so she couldn't track me back, changing my online passwords, reorganizing documents she didn't even know I was moving, and every step felt like I was slowly walking out of the life we shared, one hidden action at a time. And at night, when she came home smelling different, sweet but unfamiliar, I'd pretend not to notice, pretend her teary therapy breakthroughs made sense, pretend her sudden energy spike was genuine, and she'd curl up next to me with the same arms she wrapped around him hours before, and she'd say things like, I feel like I'm becoming a better version of myself, and thank you for supporting me through therapy. And I'd just nod, swallowing everything like poison, telling myself to wait, to breathe, to plan, because exploding would give her the upper hand, but staying silent gave me control. And that control became my lifeline, my anchor, my only sense of sanity in a marriage that was no longer a marriage but a slow motion implosion. Only I acknowledged, and the craziest part, the sickest part, was that she seemed truly happy. Like living two lives energized her. Like cheating wasn't guilt-inducing but euphoric. Like she was getting emotional validation from therapy husband and physical attention from hotel husband, and she got to come home to me, the stable husband, who paid bills and kept her world steady. And I realized, slowly, painfully, that she wasn't torn or conflicted or remorseful. She was thriving inside the lie, bathing in it, feeding off it, and while she floated in her fantasy, I was drowning quietly, putting my life back together, piece by piece, behind her back. And it all felt surreal until the day everything shifted. The day a notification pinged on my phone while I was sitting alone in my car outside a grocery store, staring at the steering wheel and wondering how much longer I could keep living in this quiet hell. And I saw a message request on Facebook from someone whose name I vaguely recognized from a company Christmas party years ago. His wife, the coworker's wife, the man she kissed outside that hotel, the man she once told me she barely knew, the man she used to joke she had a tiny stupid crush on, the man she reassured me was married and boring. And seeing his wife's name made my stomach twist because there was only one reason she'd messaged me out of nowhere. And when I opened the request, there was just one single line. 7 words that blew open everything I thought I knew about what came next. 7 words that made my pulse slam through my neck. 7 words that felt like a bomb placed gently in my lap. We need to talk. It's about them. I didn't know what to expect when I agreed to meet the affair partner's wife, but sitting across from her in a quiet booth at a small diner felt surreal, like two strangers trying to steady a ship that had already capsized. And the moment she slid her phone toward me and said, I think we're living the same nightmare, something inside me cracked because her screenshots looked exactly like mine. Timestamps, locations, messages, excuses. And for the first time since this hell started, I felt less insane, less alone. Listening to her voice tremble as she explained how she'd been piecing things together for months, how his late night inventory shifts never made sense, how the man she loved suddenly started showering more, dressing different, smiling at texts he hid from her, and then her eyes filled when she whispered the part that hit like a punch straight to the stomach. She was pregnant, carrying the child of a man who was cheating on her during appointments. During moments, she thought he was stepping up to support their growing family, and I swear my heart broke for her in a way I didn't expect, because while I was losing a marriage, she was losing a whole future, a whole life she was supposed to build with someone who turned out to be a stranger. And we spent that afternoon sharing everything. Screenshots, stories, patterns, the lies we heard, the excuses they fed us, and by the time the plates of untouched food went cold between us, we were sitting in a silence that didn't need to be filled. Both of us knowing the truth was too big to ignore now. And we decided not out of revenge, not out of rage, but out of sheer exhaustion, that we deserved answers, deserved honesty, deserved to look the two people who tore our worlds apart straight in the eye and say, we know. But life doesn't wait for perfect timing. It doesn't pause for us to plan the emotionally clean version of a confrontation, because before we could even decide how or when to confront them, the universe detonated everything. For us, when she marched into his office the next day, shaking, crying, holding her phone in her hand like a weapon, and confronted him right there in front of his coworkers, telling him she knew, telling him she saw the messages, telling him she wasn't going to let him lie to her anymore, and someone recorded the whole thing, someone who probably thought it would be funny or dramatic to upload online, and suddenly chaos erupted in the office as he tried to pull her aside, tried to shut her up, tried to drag her out of the hallway while his coworkers stared, mouths open, phones out, muttering his name like he was a plot twist in a show they didn't remember signing up to watch. And by the time she stormed out, HR was already involved. Whispers were already spreading, and the recording was already making rounds faster than either of us could imagine. And I knew something was wrong the second my phone started vibrating nonstop that afternoon, while I was at home alone, sitting in the dim light of our living room, waiting for whatever storm would hit next. But nothing prepared me for the sound of the front door slamming open like someone had run full force into it, or the sight of my wife stumbling inside with mascara smeared across her cheeks, gasping like she'd run a marathon through hell, shaking so hard she looked like she might collapse. And before I could even rise from the couch, she threw herself against me, burying her face in my chest, sobbing so violently I could feel her ribs tremble as she choked out, "Please, please, please don't hate me. I messed up. I messed up so bad. It was one mistake. I didn't mean for it to go this far." And it was almost astonishing how she clung to the belief that I didn't know, that I was still the oblivious husband who would swallow her half-truths and comforting lies, that she could cry hard enough to erase months of betrayal, and she kept begging me to believe her story. Some pathetic attempt to twist months of cheating into a slip, a moment of weakness, a bad decision she wasn't thinking clearly about. And I just sat there silently, letting her unravel, letting her confess in this scrambled, panicked word salad, while she desperately tried to protect her image, her reputation, her marriage, not because she regretted cheating, but because she was terrified of being exposed, terrified of facing consequences, terrified of losing the life she lived so comfortably in. And I realized then how different we were in this moment. She was crying because she'd been caught, and I wasn't crying at all because I had been grieving for months, long before she ever walked through that door, long before she ever imagined her affair partner's wife would blow everything open in public, long before she realized the fantasy life she'd built was about to collapse on top of her. And when the truth started circulating, screenshots spreading through their workplace, colleagues whispering, HR reviewing files, her affair partner getting dragged into meetings he couldn't talk his way out of, everything spiraled fast. He lost his job within hours. His pregnant wife packed her bags and moved to her sister's. The recording from the office leaked online where family members and friends saw, and my wife tried desperately to fix her reputation, scrambling to explain, to justify, to twist the story into something less humiliating. But every excuse she made was drowned out by the evidence, the same evidence I had quietly collected for months. And when she finally looked at me through swollen eyes, clutching my sleeve like she still believed I'd be her savior, still believed I'd clean up her mess, still believed I'd hold her together the way I always had, I gently pulled my arm away and looked her dead in the eyes, feeling the calmest I had felt in months. And I said the only sentence left worth saying, the one that marked the moment everything truly ended. "I'm not saving you from this. Save yourself." I never imagined that the quietest place I would ever live would also be the first place I truly felt alive again. But that tiny apartment, the one-bedroom space with creaking floors, mismatched blinds, and a balcony barely big enough for a folding chair, became the first home I'd had in years. Not because of its walls or furniture, but because the air inside it didn't suffocate me, didn't carry the scent of someone else's lies, didn't make me question my worth every time I walked through the door. And the first night I slept there alone, really alone, I woke up feeling something I hadn't felt in months, steady, grounded, unburdened, and from that moment I started rebuilding myself piece by piece in a way I didn't even know I needed, joining a gym again and rediscovering the strength I had let dissolve while trying to hold together a marriage that was already collapsing, lifting weights until my body felt like mine again, reconnecting with friends I had slowly drifted from while trying to keep peace in a home that was anything but peaceful, going out for drinks, for long drives, for spontaneous late-night diner runs that reminded me what life felt like when it wasn't filtered through anxiety. And even my business, something I had neglected under the emotional weight of everything, started rising again as my mind cleared, my decisions sharpened, my confidence returned in pieces. And for the first time in years, I felt myself stepping into my own skin instead of standing in someone else's shadow. Meanwhile, my ex-wife spiraled quietly in the background, her life shrinking at the same rate mine expanded. Her coworkers avoiding her like she carried a storm cloud around, whispers floating behind her in hallways she once walked through easily, her therapist refusing to continue sessions because she lacked honesty and emotional accountability. A polite way of saying therapy can't untangle your life if you're still actively tying new knots. And her affair partner, the man she once risked everything for, was suddenly too busy begging his pregnant wife to come home to even acknowledge mine, blocking her number, ignoring her messages, shutting the door she thought she could always slip through, leaving her alone in the ruin she built with her own hands. And that was when the messages from her started flooding in. Long texts sent at midnight telling me she missed me, short ones saying she was broken, emails where she claimed she lost herself, handwritten letters pressed under the door of my apartment saying she never meant for any of this to happen, and voicemails where her breath shook as she said she wished we could try again. But each message felt like a distant echo from a life I no longer lived, a life I no longer wanted, and with every attempt she made to claw her way back into my world, I realized more clearly how far I had already stepped out of hers, because something inside me had shifted permanently the day I walked away. I was no longer the man who waited at home while she lived two lives, no longer the man who swallowed pain quietly, no longer the man who measured his worth through someone else's commitment. And while she unraveled, trying to undo her consequences, I was rising. Not explosively, not dramatically, but slowly, steadily, beautifully. Traveling for the first time in years, seeing cities I once put off because we should go together someday, finally eating at restaurants I'd saved for anniversaries she later spent at hotels with someone else. And eventually, somewhere between rebuilding my body and repairing my soul, I met someone new. Not someone who healed me. Not someone who replaced her, but someone who didn't demand I shrink to fit inside their insecurities. Someone peaceful, gentle, consistent, someone whose presence felt like breathing clean air after years of carbon monoxide. And this new chapter of my life didn't feel rushed or desperate. It felt natural, earned, quiet in the best way, and it wasn't until months later, long after her reputation cracked, long after her affair partner lost his job, long after her lies stopped holding any power, that she finally asked to meet one last time, sitting across from me at a cafe with shaking hands and tired eyes, confessing in a voice so small it barely belonged to the woman I once knew that she never meant to cheat, never meant to destroy us, never meant for it to go that far, that she started therapy because she thought I was losing interest, that she wanted to feel wanted again, that she didn't know how to tell me she felt invisible, and hearing her say those words should have hurt, should have reopened wounds, should have made me second guess everything. But instead I felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, not pity, just closure, the kind that doesn't come from answers but from growth, because somewhere along the way I had stepped so far beyond her story that her confession didn't break me or fix me. It simply confirmed that I had outgrown the version of myself who once begged for her love. And when I stood up to leave, watching her eyes fill with the realization that I wasn't coming back, that there was no trying again, no reset button, no version of us that could survive the truth, I finally understood what this entire painful journey had been building toward. Not revenge, not validation, but transformation. And as I walked out into the warm, open air of a life that finally felt like mine again, the words formed clearly in my mind. The truest ending to a story that nearly destroyed me, but ultimately rebuilt me. She lied to escape herself, but losing her forced me to find myself. The end? My wife wanted an open marriage for herself, so I gave her the freedom she asked for and the consequences she didn't expect. I never thought my marriage would unravel on an ordinary Tuesday night, the kind of evening where nothing should have happened. No fights, no dramatic revelations, just leftovers in the microwave and a dumb sitcom playing in the background in our little house in Oregon. But looking back, maybe the warning signs were there long before Emily opened her mouth and dropped the bomb that would shatter everything I thought I understood about love, loyalty, and who she really was. Maybe I should have noticed how she'd started dressing differently. First subtle, new jeans, slightly more fitted tops, then suddenly bold, tight dresses she never wore in the 6 years we were together. Or how she began hanging out with this new work-for friend group, people she never mentioned before but somehow saw every weekend. Or how she switched her phone password after years of it being the same. And when I asked casually why, she shrugged like it was no big deal, like I was old-fashioned for even noticing. But at the time, I chalked it up to a phase, a little self-improvement arc like people go through, because that's what good husbands do. They trust, they don't overthink, they don't assume the person they love is preparing to tear their life apart. And that's exactly what I told myself as she sat across from me at the dinner table, fidgeting with her fork like she was about to confess to a crime, her eyes darting everywhere except at me, until she finally inhaled and said, "I've been doing a lot of thinking lately." And I swear my stomach dropped before she even said the next words, because nothing good ever follows that sentence. She said she loved me, said I was her best friend, her safe place, but then she pivoted hard, into how she'd been reading about people exploring their identities and breaking societal norms, and how marriage shouldn't feel like ownership. And I remember sitting there, frozen, because it sounded like she'd rehearsed the whole speech in the mirror and then she said it, soft but confident, like she expected me to just smile and nod. She wanted an open marriage, not for both of us, though she tried to word it like that, but for herself, because she didn't want to lose what we had, while also wanting new experiences. And I just stared at her, trying to process how the woman who used to cry at rom-coms and talk about kids in a forever home was suddenly reciting lines like she'd swallowed a polyamory subreddit. I asked her, calmly, because my brain shut down to protect me from exploding, why now? Why us? Why this? And she gave me this shaky half smile, saying she didn't want resentment to build if she never explored who she truly was. And that phrase stuck with me like poison, because it told me one thing clearly. She already had someone in mind. And this wasn't exploration, it was justification. When I asked her directly if there was someone else, she instantly got defensive, accusing me of not trusting her and twisting the narrative. Like my suspicion was the problem rather than the massive betrayal she was calmly requesting over dinner. And then she hit me with emotional manipulation I didn't even realize she was capable of, saying if I didn't support her journey, maybe we needed a temporary separation so she could figure herself out. And hearing that from the woman who once promised she'd always choose me felt like someone was peeling my chest open. But I kept my voice steady because if I cracked, I knew she'd use it as proof I wasn't emotionally mature enough to consider her feelings. And then something inside me shifted. Not anger, not yet, but clarity. Because in her desperation, in her guilt-trippy lines about growing individually so we can grow together, I could finally see the truth. She wasn't asking permission. She was asking me to bless what she already planned to do. So I agreed, quietly, calmly, and I watched her face do this stunned little twitch as if she didn't expect me to say yes without a fight. And I swear that reaction told me everything. She wanted to be the sympathetic one, the empowered woman breaking free, while I played the devastated husband she could still be friends with. But if she wanted freedom, I'd give it to her in a way she never expected. She went upstairs immediately after, like she'd been waiting for my approval, and within minutes I heard the familiar chime of app notifications. Dozens of them, because she didn't waste a single second. And the image burned into my memory is her sitting cross-legged on the bed, swiping, texting, giggling softly to herself like a teenager, while I stood in the hallway silently absorbing the fact that the woman I loved was already halfway out the door. That night was a blur of numbness for me, watching TV without watching it, sitting on the couch with my hands folded so tightly my knuckles went white, replaying every conversation, every moment she seemed distant, every excuse she'd made the past few months, realizing how naive I'd been. But I didn't confront her, not yet. I just listened, observed, like a silent witness in my own marriage, noticing how she turned her phone face down every time she walked past me, how she smiled at messages she tried to hide, how she started humming again, like she did when we first dated. Except this time, the newness wasn't about me, and the next few days were a masterclass in how quickly someone can detach when they think they've secured a backup plan. They come home late, they shower before saying hi, they forget to mention where they were, and when you ask, they give vague answers like, just out, or you don't have to worry, which somehow only makes you worry more. Then came the night she got fully ready, makeup, heels, the red dress she used to say she was saving for our anniversary dinner, and she told me she was meeting friends. But we both knew it wasn't friends, not when her eyes sparkled in a way they hadn't for me in months. And I felt this dull ache in my chest, not jealousy, but disbelief that I was watching my wife prepare for her first date with another man while expecting me to act supportive and modern and emotionally progressive. She kissed my cheek on her way out like it was some kind of participation trophy, a sad little pat of reassurance that meant nothing, and the door closed behind her with a softness that hurt worse than a slam. And I sat there, same couch, same silence, same ache, but something inside me, deep and buried, clicked into place. A tiny spark of resolve I didn't fully understand yet, but it whispered one thing clearly. This wasn't going to break me the way she expected. This was going to change me. The strange thing about betrayal is that after the initial shock fades, life doesn't immediately crumble the way you expect. It just keeps moving, day by day, like nothing happened, even though everything has. And that's exactly how the first few weeks of our so-called open marriage felt. Emily floating through the house like she was living in some romantic comedy montage while I played the background character who didn't get the script because she embraced her new lifestyle with a level of enthusiasm I'd never seen her show for me or anything we built together. She dressed up more often, wearing outfits that didn't seem meant for simple dinners or casual bar hangouts. Shorter skirts, low-cut tops, heels she once complained made her feet hurt, but now she wore them without hesitation, spritzing perfume that filled the hallway while she humming songs that had never been part of our playlist. And every night she left with the same rehearsed lines. Don't wait up. I'll text you later. Be safe, like she was the one staying home instead of me. And the part that stung wasn't just her leaving, it was how emotionally absent she became. Even on the days she stayed in, she'd sit on the couch scrolling through her phone with a smile she used to reserve for our inside jokes, barely looking at me, barely speaking unless I asked her a direct question, and even then, her answers were clipped, distracted, like she was only half in the room, and I realized she genuinely believed I would stay loyal, miserable, and quietly grateful for whatever scraps of affection she tossed my way, as if I had no other options, as if she was some irreplaceable center of my universe. And for a while, I did feel pathetic. Eating dinner alone, lying awake at night, listening to the garage door open at 1 a.m., trying not to imagine what she'd been doing. But somewhere in the exhaustion and humiliation, a switch flipped inside me, and I decided I wasn't going to sit there suffering while she lived her new chapter. So I started going to the gym again, something I hadn't done seriously since college, and the first day back was rough. My muscles ached, my lungs burned, I felt out of shape and out of place. But there was something therapeutic about pushing my body through the pain, watching the sweat soak my shirt instead of soaking my pillow, feeling the quiet determination wake up in me again. I kept going, day after day, and within weeks my clothes fit differently, my posture straightened, the dark circles under my eyes faded, and even my coworkers started noticing. Not in a "you look tired" way, but with genuine surprise, asking if I'd been working out, complimenting my energy, and one day, a female coworker named Lily stopped me in the hallway after a meeting just to say, "You look really good lately." Like, really good. And the warmth in her tone was something I hadn't heard from Emily in months. I didn't flirt back, not even a little, but I felt alive for the first time since all this started. And weirdly enough, Emily must have sensed the shift, because that evening, when I mentioned the compliment casually, her face did this quick, involuntary twitch, jealousy, sharp and immediate, before she disguised it behind a forced laugh and said, "Well, good for you." But her eyes didn't match her voice. It was the first crack in her confidence. And I saw how unsettled she was, that I wasn't sitting at home pining over her every night, because suddenly she started asking where I was going after work, why I was coming home late, why I was dressing nicer, even though she'd been doing the same thing for months without a shred of guilt or explanation. And that shift in power, not because I sought other women, but because I rediscovered myself, threw her off balance in ways she couldn't hide. Meanwhile, her main guy, who she still pretended didn't exist despite the obvious signs, began showing cracks in her fantasy too. Her phone stopped lighting up as often. She'd stare at the screen with this tiny frown like she was waiting for a text that never came. And she started staying home on nights she used to dress up, claiming she was tired or not in the mood. But the real cute reason became clear when I overheard her talking to her friend on the phone, whispering in her office, thinking I wasn't around, saying he'd been busy, distant, complicated. And when she hung up, her face looked like a balloon slowly deflating. I didn't say anything, not even when she tossed her phone on the couch with a sigh heavy enough to shake the room, because by then I had learned to observe instead of react, silent and steady as everything she'd chosen began unraveling in front of her. The turning point came when one of her notifications popped up while she was in the kitchen. Yes, she still kept her phone locked, but the preview was enough. His name, followed by a message saying, "Can't tonight? Seeing someone else?" And the way her face went pale told me everything I needed to know. She wasn't his priority. She wasn't his girlfriend. She wasn't even special. Just a convenient distraction for him, the same way she assumed I'd be a convenient safety net for her. And the irony of it would have broken me months earlier. But now, I just felt a strange, quiet detachment. I didn't confront her, didn't throw it in her face, didn't ask if she was okay, because for the first time in a long time, I realized her choices weren't my responsibility. And watching her sit on the edge of the bed that night, silent, tense, lost in a mess she created with her own hands, felt like witnessing karma arrive right on schedule. I kept growing, kept improving, kept rebuilding myself piece by piece, while she desperately tried to pretend nothing was wrong, lying next to me in bed with her back turned, clutching her phone like a lifeline that wasn't answering her anymore. And I stayed quiet, patient, steady, because I knew something she didn't. The world she left me for was already crumbling, and the world I was building without her was getting stronger every single day. The funny thing about fantasies is that they never die with a bang. They rot slowly, quietly, like fruit left on the counter. And that's exactly how Emily's so-called new chapter collapsed right in front of me, beginning the moment her main guy stopped replying altogether. One day, she was glowing, giggling at her messages, humming as she got ready for girls' night, and the next, she was staring at her phone with this tight, panicked expression, refreshing the screen like the lack of notifications was a glitch instead of reality. And watching that shift was surreal because for months she'd walked around like she was a heroine of her own romantic drama, while I was supposed to be the sad background character quietly suffering in the shadows. But now her hero had abandoned the script and she didn't know what to do without someone validating her. And the worst part, if you could call it that, was that she tried to hide it at first. She pretended everything was normal, humming around the house with forced cheer, saying she was just tired or not feeling social tonight, but the truth became impossible to miss when she started calling me during the day just to check in. When she hadn't done that once since she opened the marriage, and her voice sounded different too. Softer, uncertain, almost fragile, as if she was afraid I wouldn't pick up. And honestly, sometimes I didn't, not out of spite, but because I was actually busy living my own life, going to the gym, talking with people, rebuilding myself piece by piece to the point where the fact that my phone was buzzing from my own wife felt like a bizarre role reversal I never asked for. She began staying home more too, hovering around the kitchen while I cooked, trying to start conversations she used to avoid, asking about my day with this forced brightness that cracked at the edges, and when I'd give calm, simple answers, she looked disappointed, like she expected more, like she wanted me to fill the silence she no longer knew how to sit in. And then came the cooking. Her suddenly making my favorite meals out of nowhere, acting like it was completely normal despite not having cooked for me in months, placing a plate in front of me with this hopeful, vulnerable look that screamed, please notice me, please want me, please choose me the way he didn't. And I'd thank her, smile politely, and eat. But there was a wall inside me that no amount of garlic butter chicken could break through. The cuddling attempts came next, these awkward, hesitant scoots closer to me on the couch, her resting her head on my shoulder like she used to. Except back then it felt natural, and now it felt like she was trying to glue together something she ripped apart with her own hands. And when she absent-mindedly traced her fingers along my arm one night, trying to initiate intimacy, something inside me didn't react the way it once did, because I didn't see my wife trying to reconnect. I saw someone grieving the loss of a fantasy that was never real to begin with, and instead of pulling her closer, I gently shifted away. Not rude, not cold, just distant. That distance confused her at first, then scared her, because suddenly she started asking real questions. Are we okay? Do you still want this? Are you seeing someone? And each time I answered honestly, yes, we're fine. Yes, I care about you. No, I'm not seeing anyone. But the emotional charge behind those answers was gone, and she felt it like a punch. The moment everything truly cracked, though, was when she finally sat down next to me at the dining table, wringing her hands like she was about to confess a crime, and said she wanted to close the marriage, that she thought this was a mistake, that she realized what mattered, that she wanted us back. And hearing those words was almost surreal, because they were the exact lines she refused to listen to when they were coming from me months earlier. And I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw not the confident woman who once pushed me aside for someone else, but a terrified person who finally understood the cost of breaking something that wasn't meant to be played with. And I don't know what possessed me. Maybe irony, maybe poetic justice, but I calmly repeated her own words back to her, the same ones she used when she pressured me into agreeing, I think I still need to explore who I am. And the look on her face, I'll never forget it. It was like watching her soul trip and fall, her eyes widening, her breath catching, her entire world cracking open, because for the first time she realized she no longer had control of the narrative, no longer had the emotional upper hand, no longer got to decide when things started and stopped, and she broke. Right there at the table, whispering that she didn't want to lose me, that she was stupid, that she didn't know why she did what she did, that she thought she needed something new, but what she really needed was me. And her voice trembled in a way I'd never heard before. But what hit her hardest wasn't my calm rejection. It was seeing that I hadn't replaced her, hadn't cheated, hadn't even entertained anyone else, despite having every reason to, and that loyalty, even after everything she put me through, cut her deeper than any revenge could have, because it forced her to see exactly who she lost and exactly who she had become. And as she sat there shaking, tears streaming, begging for another chance, I felt nothing but a bittersweet clarity. She wanted freedom, she chased it, she drowned in it, and now that she wanted safety again, I was no longer the man willing to break himself to give it to her. The night everything came to a head felt strangely calm, like the universe had finally exhaled after months of tension. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table when Emily walked in with red eyes, trembling fingers, and this defeated posture I had never seen on her before. Not even during our worst arguments. She sat across from me like she was afraid the chair might reject her, and for a long moment she just stared at her hands as if the words she needed were written on her palms. Then finally she whispered, I need to tell you the truth. And what followed wasn't dramatic or explosive. It was quiet, raw, and painfully human, her voice cracking as she admitted everything, that she wanted the open marriage not because she needed identity exploration or emotional growth, but because she was infatuated with another man, someone who made her feel wanted in a way she convinced herself I no longer could, someone who flirted with her at a time she was bored or restless or insecure, someone she built a fantasy around until she believed it was real. And she confessed that she pushed the open marriage because she didn't want to be the villain, didn't want to admit she wanted to see him while keeping me as her emotional safety net. And the weight of that honesty, late as it was, hung between us like smoke. She kept apologizing, saying she never meant to hurt me, that she thought she could explore things and come back to me unchanged, that she thought we were strong enough to survive it. And hearing that made me realize how deeply she underestimated what love actually meant. She told me the guy she chased never cared for her the way she imagined, that he used her, played her, entertained her only when he was bored. And when she finally had the freedom to be with him openly, he lost interest because she no longer came with the thrill of secrecy. And I watched her crumble under the weight of her own choices, tears streaming down her face as she begged me, literally begged me, to give her another chance, to go to therapy together, to rebuild, to try again because she now understood what she had thrown away, and every promise she made, I'll change, I'll be better, I'll put us first, was soaked in the kind of desperation people only feel when they finally see the value of something they took for granted until it's too late. And here's the part I didn't expect. I believe she meant every word. Not because she deserved belief, but because her pain was too real, too raw to be faked. But emotional truth doesn't erase consequences, and love, whatever pieces of it were still left, couldn't resurrect the version of me who used to beg for her attention, chase her validation, or excuse her neglect. So I let her talk, let her cry, let her apologize until the dam broke completely, and then I told her the truth I had been slowly building inside myself, that I would always care for the memories we had, for the years of laughter and small rituals and comfort that once held us together. But I couldn't rebuild a foundation she willingly smashed to pursue someone who never saw her the way I did. That trust wasn't something you could glue back together just because you regretted dropping it. And even though I wasn't angry anymore, because pain eventually burns itself out, I was done being the man she ran back to only way when the world rejected her. I told her I forgave her, not because she hadn't hurt me, but because forgiveness was my way of letting myself go, freeing myself from the bitterness she expected me to drown in. And when I said I wanted a divorce, she broke in a way I didn't think possible, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe, grabbing my hands like they were the last thing keeping her tethered to reality, whispering, "Please don't leave me, please don't give up on me, I'll do anything." And her tears soaked my palms, but they didn't move me the way they once would have, because the man who needed her was gone, replaced by someone she unknowingly pushed me to become. The next weeks were a quiet, painful blur, her moving out slowly, still trying to convince me to reconsider, trying to cook, trying to laugh, trying to remind me of who we were. But every attempt only showed how far apart we had grown. When the divorce papers were finally signed, she cried harder than she did when she admitted the affair. And as she left our house for the last time, she stood in the doorway, looking at me with this shattered expression, whispering, "I didn't know freedom would cost me you." And for the first time, I saw the complete picture, not of revenge, not of karma, but of someone learning the hardest lesson life can teach. That choices echo, and some echoes never fade, and when she walked away, I felt a strange mix of sadness and peace, because I wasn't walking toward loneliness. I was walking toward a life where I no longer had to shrink myself for someone else's validation, a life where I could grow without being punished for it. Emily wanted freedom, and I gave it to her fully, completely, without resentment. And in the end, that freedom destroyed her far more thoroughly than any revenge plan could have, because she lost the man who loved her completely, the man who stayed loyal even when broken, the man she assumed would always be there waiting. And as for me, I ended the marriage with dignity, with clarity, and with a heart that, while scarred, was stronger and wiser than ever before, ready for real love, steady love, honest love, not borrowed affection or temporary thrill, but something rooted, healthy, and mutual. The kind of love that grows from soil that hasn't been poisoned by regret. And as I closed the chapter on the life I had with her, I finally understood that sometimes the greatest victory isn't revenge. It's becoming someone you're proud of, someone you fought to rebuild, someone no one will ever take for granted again. The end.